everyone for being here tonight. It's a special joint study session with our planning commissioners. Hello, planning commissioners. We have a full house over there. That is fantastic. First time probably in years. And the city council. And yeah, right. So is there a planning commissioner, sorry, Brent, that would like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance in just a moment? Richard? All right. So if we can, we'll call to order and we'll have our, who would like to do a roll call for the planning commission? Okay. Yeah, start with the planning commission. Sure. Here. 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 All right, so now we'll stand for a moment of silence and then Richard will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. By the United States of America and the Republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and with justice for all. Thank you, Commissioner St. John, for leading us. And we're just here for one item for a study session, final presentation on the Cypress Knolls Visioning Report. And who would like to lead us?
Here's Allison. Do you want to introduce?
Good evening, Allison.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council and members of the public. I'm Allison Hunter. I'm the planning manager for the Community Development Department, and I'm happy to introduce Brian Mooney. Not yet, Brian. He's very enthusiastic. And Hanson Home, who are of the, I always forget the long name of their group. CPAT for short, yes. They're part of the American Planning Association. Oh, California chapter of the American Planning Association, California Planning Assistance Team. And they have been working really well with the city. They conducted a big workshop in January, as many of you recall and attended that. It was a fantastic workshop for the public. And to get the public's input on their vision for the Cypress Knolls property. So with that, I'll hand it over to Brian and Hanson. And they're going to walk you through the PowerPoint presentation and we can field any questions that you might have.
Welcome back, Hanson and Brian. Thank you for your assistance team providing everything.
Well, thank you very much for, first of all, for having us, and thank you for having us again. We're going to do this presentation together, since it's always good to have two minds in relationship to moving forward. But I just always treasure getting the city council and the planning commission together in relationship to it. Creates that joint aspect of visions that a city can move forward to. So it's a very special time in relationship to it. I'm going to make sure I'm hitting the right one. How do you like that? We got to figure out which one. This is the forward. Maybe we're going to have to work on moving it forward. Do I need to coordinate with? What's that? Trying me over there? Yeah. Okay, you go to the first slide. We'll do it the old-fashioned way. First slide, please. There's having trouble all around. There we are. Well, as stated earlier, as Allison mentioned, we did do an interview process. We also did an analysis of everything we saw that was out there. We read a lot of your reports in relationship to the past work, particularly with the Fort Ord situation and kind of going through it. And that really was going to culminate within a workshop on January 7th, 2023, / charrette, where we wanted to bring together the community to go through a design process, because the whole emphasis of our approach is really to try to make sure that we're just assisting you in designing a project that really represents the community of Marina. We've already said this, but ultimately we also represent the Planners Emeritus Network, which is a group of retired, although I'm still working, ultimately for the most part, we are retired professionals. Most of us also are members of the College of Fellows of American Planners for the entire country, ultimately. And we're always looking for ways that we can contribute back. And we sort of represent the California American Planning Association. Besides myself, we also had David Salazar, who a number of you have met in relationship to that. By the way, I just wanted to put a plug in. David can't be with us because he has a nonprofit, and he's taking minority students, high school students, to Cal Poly Pomona to introduce them to planning school in relationship to do it. So you'll find we're dedicated in a lot of ways. Hanson Hom, been a past community development director, assistant city manager, retired, but ultimately getting involved from the Northern California. By the way, David was the planner for the Monterey Bay, Monterey Bay University. I apologize for butchering the name, but ultimately, so he was the first planner in relationship to that, and worked here for 15 years in relationship. And then I want to give a special discussion to Diego Velasco, because Diego's an urban designer who I work with, and we work together all over California. And he's with City Thinkers. He's not a member of our regular group, but he has a certain amount of talent and also in knowledge in relationship to putting together these special programs for charrettes and moving forward. Next slide. These images, as we get through it, give you just an idea of that exciting time. And was a very, very successful meeting in our mind, both from the standpoint of the diversity and also the makeup of the groups in relationship to it, and representing a wide range of different people. Now, we didn't have some of the young families we were hoping to, because they were all there before we got there, and then they all said it's time to go home. But we did have some high school students, we had some college students, and a good cross section. And everybody seemed to be very enthusiastic in going through it. Next slide, please. And eventually you'll even see the mayor very enthusiastically approaching it, going into the planning program of what he was looking for. Now, next slide, just to really reorient you to the project. It's 188 acres, previously developed as military housing. You did have a previously adopted project for 844 senior housing units, also RV storage, open space community. That is no longer moving forward. That's really a dead project. And so I want to make sure we emphasize that. You do have a road infrastructure in relationship, so using 3rd Avenue and 4th Avenue and how it ties together with California and all of those areas is very, very important. But you also have some environmental hazards associated with, which of course I was very impressed. I drove the site again today. I see the progress you're making, and it's excellent in relationship to that. Natural topography and the endangered species, Jadililla plant species. Thank you very much, Bruce. It looks like I pronounced it right. We kept on arguing, Jalilla or Jalilla. It's a key thing that we wanted to take into focus in relationship to any design standards. So kind of an opportunities and constraints analysis. Now, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Hanson to discuss some of the key factors, the objectives, and going into the activities we had during the day.
Thank you, Brian. And first, I want to once again say thank you to the mayor, to the city council, to the planning commissioner, and also the city staff for inviting us into your community to hopefully provide some value-added expertise to you. This has been a really interesting process. We're so pleased to be involved in helping to set a future course for the planning for this community. So thank you once again. I want a special thanks to Guido, because he's the one that he's the guilty party who connected us to this community. So I want to thank him. But one of the things that when we were formulating, how can we add value to the process that you've already been involved in historically on this site? So the whole idea was a charrette process. And a charrette is an opportunity to, through an interactive process, through a more structured process, get the kind of input from the community to move forward. And our charge in talking to city staff was, how can we help set a planning framework for the future effort that's needed to realize a successful project on this site? So in order to kind of design this charrette, we thought the first step was we need to get to know the community. So we did a site visit, and generously, each one of you agreed to do a one-on-one interview for us to probe and get your personal viewpoint on what's important to you as a community. So that was very helpful in helping us craft the actual organization of charrette. So a couple of things came up that I think were common in a lot of the discussions we had with you. The key item that came across from almost everyone was workforce housing, the need to have residential uses that are attainable to the middle class or the missing middles. So that what we see here. About housing getting so expensive, and what we keep on hearing is that the workforce is increasingly not able to afford the housing in this community. The second item that came up very strongly was sustainability. Having this project serve as a model for future development, taking advantage of the most recent technology to promote sustainability, energy conservation. Another third item was realizing the uniqueness of this site. This is a wonderful site, has undulating topography, trees. It's wonderful to build from. So having creative architecture and respecting the landscape and bringing artistic elements into the overall development that really respects the site, the uniqueness of the site. We also heard that this community is very diverse, and recognizing that this new development needs to be inclusive and to meet the diverse needs of all elements of this community as well as the region. Creating a sense of place, as I mentioned, this is a unique site. You don't want to waste it. The fact that it's already a unique site, you're already ahead of the curve, but how do you embellish the desire to embellish and further enhance this sense of place and really have it reflect the uniqueness of this community? Certainly preserving the trees, endangered species and the topography of the site, avoiding mass grading was came up many times. Having a park and open space network was also emphasized. So not only having housing, but having the supportive open space to enhance the living environment. And finally, last but not least, this came up quite frequently, really respect the history of this site, the former military base, somehow incorporate that history into the development. Next slide. So with that, we organized a charrette around 3 exercises, and you guys, most of you, I think, attended the charrette. So we had one exercise where we wanted to reaffirm with the community, is there agreement on these initial guiding principles that we've heard from planning commissioners and city council members? So we organized a guiding workshops exercise, guiding principles exercise. Second item there was a real interest in making sure it's quality design, quality housing, and also the question of what type of housing does this community want to see on this site. So we organized a second exercise, what we call design preferences, where we try to elicit from the community what type of housing or community amenities they want to see on the site. Then the third item, which Brian will cover a little bit more, was probably the core of the exercise, I would say, is the site plan exercise. That was, I think, the fun exercise where people just got to play with the maps, with the stickies and all of that. So I hope people enjoyed that. It's usually a lot of fun and it's very interactive and really constructive. So one of the when we did the guiding principles exercise, we drafted a set of what we thought what we heard were possible guiding principles, and we can ask residents, put a dot on the ones that you feel most strongly about, and put a dot on the ones maybe you feel less strong about, or even if you don't agree with it. So the good news is that what we found is what the council and what the planning commissioners highlighted were important items. There was a lot of consistency, there was a lot of alignment. So I guess the positive is there is the council and planning commissioners really reflect the community sentiment, at least those who have participated in the workshop. Once again, housing came out, probably the strongest guiding principle is workforce housing, diversity of housing, having distinctive neighborhoods. So not just a uniform housing development, having different, like maybe villages with different housing types, different densities to meet all the needs of this community. There was also several mention trying to emphasize a local preference, trying to market the housing. You have to be conscientious of fair housing requirements, but certainly kind of target the housing for the residents in this community. Community connection. This was emphasized by staff also, that let's not have this development just be isolated, kind of sit on itself. It shouldn't be a gated community. It should be integrated with the rest of the community. So connectivity was important for the transportation network, the neighborhoods surrounding this site, having a really strong bicycle and pedestrian network within the project, but also tied to the regional system. And also respect the fact that Marina High School is right next to the site. So there's some synergies that can be realized by working with the high school. Community amenities, the open space and public parks network is a strong item that came up. Take advantage of the site, the wonderful views, and provide adequate recreational amenities as well as other community benefits and make it a community space. Environmental responsibility, this came up in the interviews, was reinforced through the workshop of the importance of sustainability, clean energy, electrification of buildings, and just really being aggressive and setting the example for the rest of the state. Financing, I certainly, that's kind of that reality check that, whatever project gets adopted or promoted, it needs to be a project that can be financed and is sustainable, not only environmentally, but financially sustainable. So the costs can be recovered. So I know the city has a history of doing Melrose districts. So this certainly is a concept that can be adapted for Cypress Knolls. Natural resources, again, the trees, the habitat, the views is just considered like a real treasure to have as an asset. And then finally, the history, recognizing the Native American history on the site as well as the military-based history on the site. Somehow, how can we have a development that remembers that history, reflects on that history? Next slide. So the next exercise we did was the visual preference exercise. So there were like two parts of the visual preference exercise. One is based on what we heard. We assembled a lot of different examples of residential types from lower density development to higher density development. And we asked participants, put a dot on the housing types that you most like to see at Cypress Knolls and those that you feel less supportive of. And then the second part of the visual preference exercise was similar. Put a dot on those amenities you feel is really important to have on the site and those that are less important. So the next two slides provide some images of those that received the strongest endorsement. I would say the number one was the one on the top center, which are cottage homes. Oh, okay. Okay. And you have a supposed to I get the hint. No. So just to let you know, that top middle slide with the cottage homes received the highest endorsement. There's a strong support for providing smaller homes, not only for affordability purposes, for the medium, missing middle, but also so kind of like a smaller scale type of project that would also balance the higher density type of housing, which the community also supported, which is represented by the lower two slides, the multifamily housing. So there was a support for having a variety of densities on the site. So that adds to that variety. Certainly amenities to the site was reinforced by several photos. The lower left hand, the open space, provide a strong open space network, connected interspace network with trails. The bakery picture kind of really emphasized the desire to create a neighborhood center, a town center, provide convenience, retail services to serve the community, but also have it open to be available for the full community. And certainly family-oriented recreational amenities for families that's represented by the top lot. Next slide. Oops. Okay, so this again shows other pictures of housing development that were rated fairly highly through the charrette. And the difference is that it shows a variety of different densities, from townhouse densities to row homes or duet type style to multifamily housing. Another common denominator, like the slide on the lower center, was incorporate sufficient community recreational facilities within projects. So you see that example as a nice central open space feature. So certainly density is good, but also balance it with good open space features and amenities, gathering spots. And again, the upper right-hand picture really once again reinforces the need for recreational space. So these exercises are really useful to be able to illustrate or translate verbally into pictures what the community felt would be attractive to see on the Cypress Mills site. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who will kind of cover the third segment of the charrette exercise that we asked residents to provide feedback on.
I'll send you back to my spot.
Okay.
We practiced the presentation. We didn't practice the choreography. So we didn't know the room, but we're going to get better as we go along. The key thing that we wanted to do was first really organize this from a standpoint of guiding principles, as was mentioned. And that was very, very important. The next thing, we wanted to start looking at the type of development that could go in. The final part, we can call it a framework plan or we can call it an organizational plan, was look at, well, how should the site be organized? We aren't trying to plan the property. I want to make sure that that's understood, but we're trying to organize it. And so what we've come up with is this framework plan that ultimately creates a series of neighborhoods. And then each neighborhood can be developed with a lot of under the guiding principles that you set forth. And then ultimately with a mix of housing in all the neighborhoods so that they aren't all kept. And what you see here is, I'm going to have to point on myself. The 3rd Street is one that circles, and 3rd Street is very, very important. If you could go over, and it's a good place for you, Hanson. Yeah. Yeah, 3rd. He's my Vanna White. And, but that's an extremely important road in relationship to organization and taking us and connecting to other parts of the community. And then the next one is 4th. And we can see how 4th, and we wanted to try, I know the roads were right there, 4th going up, and then we took it over and that goes up to Crescent. We want to try to find a connection north-south also, and that's extremely important in relationship to it. One of the key things that we'll talk a little bit about is the 2 blue dots, and those creates nodes, and where we have that junction, and that can create an opportunity for some mixed use, community centers, gathering spots, a wide range of things. So when we're organizing it, we also want to say, where could we logically put? We've also identified some opportunities for some commercial near MGM, and we'll kind of go into that. But ultimately, so we can see the organization coming through. Now, the endangered species, those are all in pink, the Jalila. And so we saw that also as an organizing focus on how to create open space networks in relationship to cabin. So that's going to be a key factor. So we have the roads, we have these neighborhoods, which we think fit together and can give us different, and the neighborhoods offer different opportunities. E is very much a depressed area, low area, actually in sections of D, where ultimately nobody's ever going to see any development from the higher points. And so that means if you want more density or intensity, that's a good location in relationship to putting it. Up on near the school, there's actually a site also that would be a great park because it has an overlook area. And so we start seeing an organization standpoint of certain uses. In relationship to D, we know that ultimately that's across from homes, and also C. C is going to be has to be developed in a way that's sensitive to the single family detached to the north, because you want to try to make things really compatible with the surrounding land use and the surrounding communities. So we see this as our overall organization that we then can put on our guiding principles to allow us to move forward. Now, next slide. So here you see actually our overlay system from the standpoint of open space, allowing us a buffer system around the edges. We also see in the circular aspect or circulation aspect, these hatched lines with the arrows. And that one is basically road-based, which would be that one he was just pointing out, we see that associated with the open space and possibly a trail through that area that can go through an open space network. And then the road there is basically be a landscape theme that then creates a sense of place. So it's very important from our perspective to be sensitive to these things to really create that sense of place through the whole area. This brings us to our recommendations. Next slide. So what we're recommending is, one, you're currently doing a general plan. We highly recommend that you ask your consultant to move forward to create a designation for this property and to use our densities and the guiding principles to help shape that designation. That is important because then if he can include, or they can include that in their environmental impact report, that gives us a priority to potentially minimizing the CEQA process for any future development. So I think that gives you a real opportunity in relationship to addressing the transportation and addressing the greenhouse gas issues, which are the two major ones. And then ultimately giving you an opportunity to hopefully streamline the planning and development process of this property. Secondly, we recommend that you ultimately direct staff to start the process for preparing a specific plan, and then going out for RFP to bring in the type of consultants that you would need to really do that. And that's going to be in a number of different areas. But I did want to emphasize a couple of things. The Surplus Lands Act was amended in 2019. It has some different values in there that has to be looked at. That's by the state of California on if you own property, how you move forward. Water availability assessment is a key thing for this property. And then the economic and fiscal. So any team that comes in needs to understand that economic and fiscal aspect. I actually have talked to a friend of mine who's a professor at Cal, and he said, boy, Brian, this would be a great grad project for somebody if you could fit it into our schedule. But really important to move forward on that. And then connecting to the guiding principles. Now, in our report, which I know you all read in detail and have lots of questions about, we've also included some recommended follow-up. I'm not going to go into those great detail because I really want to open it up for discussion. And with that, we're a little more than, I think, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So I think it's time for us to thank you very much for listening to us. Let us put a presentation together, for allowing us to work with you, and we're available for questions.
All right. Thank you, David. I know you're online. And thank you, Hans and Brian, for being here today. Why don't we start with the Planning Commission asking any questions, and then no comments, and then we'll ask the City Council the same thing, no comments. Then maybe we get public input, and then we'll come back and have comments from Planning Commission and comments from City Council. Does that sound okay? All right, so let's go to questions first, and start with the Planning Commission Chair, if you want to do that. Ask for questions from your body.
So any questions from commissioners at this time? Okay, Let's pass this down, please.
Thank you. That was incredible. And I'm so glad to have you guys back here with us this evening. I appreciate all of this hard work that you've done and all of the consideration that you put into this planning. My questions are going to be brief, and I'm not sure that they're in the right place, so somebody's going to let me know. With respect to the 3rd and 4th Street that are coming through, I wanted to know if you could talk about the density as these guys are both dropping off onto, I need glasses, onto, what is this tiny little street?
3rd would drop off into Gym, and also to California.
California, and then 4th Street goes to
4th would go into Crescent.
Crescent.
But
Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. So, with respect to Crescent, with that type of, with the kind of traffic that would flow on 4th Avenue to join the new Marina to old Marina, or Central Marina, I'm wondering if Crescent is going to be available to receive that kind of traffic or at that volume, that density. And my second, and then the other part of that is with respect to 2nd Avenue, there's a dash line of the sidewalk that's coming through.
The dash line with trails.
But
It was trying to create pedestrian oriented trail.
so glad with that. And with the bikes and everything too, or specifically looking.
None of this has been designed yet, so it's just a concept of saying, here's what, we think is a logical pedestrian trail. It could be with a bike too, but none of that has been determined. And the same is true, the densities haven't been determined. And it may be that you have some limitations in relationship to how you connect with Crescent. But we looked through and we didn't want to try to create just a brand new connection that didn't have any association with another road. And we do know that the western portion, and you see the dashed line, we have that the city has been looking at trying to find a connection through there, but we also know that the endangered species are a real problem. So we're just looking for some connection, and the only one we can find logical was that Crescent Street. Now, does that mean, and you'll see that actually bordering it, what we had is actually open space.
Let me jump in on that because our big transportation master plan, it absolutely will not drop it down to Crescent. That's the worst thing that we'd want to do. Crescent is a very small local street, as you can see from the map. It is the only connection between southern and that part of the city. What you don't know is Patton Parkway gets connected and it runs all the way to Del Monte, and so our transportation master plan really has the connection coming to Patton Parkway. Then Patton Parkway is the collector street that moves all the traffic. The last thing we'd want is the collector traffic dumping all down into a small local neighborhood street that is already impacted. It's the only primary entrance into the high school. So, but I think what it illustrates is the importance of the Patton Parkway connection, because you're going to have the major collector coming through Cypress Knolls, coming to Patton Parkway, and you don't want it all dumping down through Crescent. So you really got to get those other connections appropriately established. And that's where when you do your transportation analysis of the whole project, it will identify exactly where the traffic needs to go and exactly where we don't want it to go. And Crescent is absolutely where we do not want the traffic going.
But to be clear, Crescent was built for that connection. So will there still be a small connection, but maybe not the only primary connection?
Correct. Crescent will never go away. The connection will always be there. But we need to move the collector traffic. And so Patton Parkway is a collector street, and that's where we want to move the volume of the traffic.
So how would you prevent people from using Crescent if you wanted them mostly to use Patton Parkway, but still Crescent was open to them?
That all becomes part of the design and the planning process.
That was really good. Okay. And then just my last one is with respect to prevailing wage. Am I in the right spot for this question? Because what I really want to know is why is Marina responsible for this? And is there a possible waiver?
That wasn't one of the things we assumed in the very beginning, based on the material that we had read, that was going to be potentially one of the constraints. So we added into the report. We aren't going to claim any expertise about that or having this report, but it was when we looked at the aspect of what could be constraints from the standpoint of the cleanup, which I think was 10 to 12 million or something in that neighborhood of that's going to be obviously a cost higher than that. Now, what your city politics are or your rules are, I don't know. And we was put in because that was part of the information that we had.
So that's a really good question, Audrey.
So, and you're correct to put prevailing wage in there because this project is part of the former Fort Ord property, and all first generation construction has to be prevailing wage. We have the same issues with Seaside. At some point, Seaside has the same issues, and they're building out some of their areas. At some point, someone may try to challenge the prevailing wage requirement, and that will ultimately end up in a lawsuit, and the court will ultimately decide that. But for right now, because it's on a former Fort Ord property, prevailing wage has to go there. And if you don't, you have to be set up to be prepared for a lawsuit.
I mentioned also, obviously, an important piece will be the financing plan. And depending on the funding sources, some funding sources also will specify prevailing wage, some of the state programs. So, so it's probably a good assumption for now. My question is that in the report, there is a specific number of houses to be built in this area as part of this project. So what is the basis of coming up to that number? Has some need assessment being carried out?
No. We assumed, we look at capacity of the land, and we said we think that from a capacity standpoint, and we look at general density across the whole area, we said 2,000 homes. We think that ultimately that's going to be dependent upon water availability and a number of other items in relationship to it. We know that the need is there in relationship to getting as many units as possible, but ultimately that's part of this next planning process, is to really do the detailed studies. So we didn't do detailed study at this stage, and we aren't actually applying densities at this stage. We're saying for discussion first of moving forward, let's use a threshold of approximately 2,000 homes, which I'm going to forget what the density was.
Yeah, it's a very soft number. I mean, we just tried to do a very conceptual evaluation, looking at the open space network, look at the roadway system that's needed, very roughly, thinking, okay, half the site will need to be preserved as either habitat area, open space amenities, common areas, commercial uses, trail networking, et cetera. And then based on the preference that we saw that showed a variety of different densities that seemed to be acceptable to the community, we just very conceptually, maybe about 2,000 units. But as Brian mentioned, that is subject to considerably more analysis through your specific plan process, and certainly community engagement process and talking with developers, et cetera. So certainly that's not, a scientific number.
And if you used half the property, it would be about 21 units per acre to get 2,000 units. And our city manager has some input on this.
Planning Commission, you're asking really amazing questions that I think are really important for the foundation. All the former Fort Ord properties, when it was established, there's a housing cap that was established of 6,160 units. And so you can't exceed that. And then as former Fort Ord developed, it was based on first come, first served. And so as Marina developed and Seaside developed, you took those allotments. And so the original Cypress Knolls plan had that allotment of 8,000 or 844. That's how that number, we came up with that number. Now, almost all of that allotment of 6,160 has been used. And so I think the important thing this plan is showing it is it has, as they mentioned, it has the capacity for several thousand homes. But because of this cap, the first city that exceeds that cap, you'll be sued by Landwatch, because that cap relates to water, and that one of their primary issues is they don't want any more water drawn from the 900-foot aquifer. And so it's a soft number, but it's a very hard number in relationship to that 6,160 unit cap.
You know, at the same time, you have the state of California saying we need as many units as we possibly can. So we really looked at this from urban planning perspective of where we saw the capacity, the open space requirements, and that's where we came up with the ballpark number.
So Lane, to follow up on what you just said, then how would Marina legally build even the first home if the cap's already been met?
Since it's already entitled for the 800, so we have 844 already allotted to our city, which was a good thing in the approval of 15 years ago when we got that. So it's secured at least that amount of.
So that's part of the 6,160 units.
Correct.
We were first come, first served. That was part.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, okay, go ahead, please. That will be the next question, but do you have a comment on this one? I'm just going to comment just because I work in a community, City of Alameda, that has the exact same problem city manager just mentioned, where, like all of the military closure, there's a cap, and housing element purposes, you know, there's a desire to exceed that cap. But the process to amend that cap is a pretty, you know, is a involved process. Not saying it's not possible, but it involves you going back to the federal government, reopening negotiations. So it is a difficult issue to deal with, especially when there's such a strong need for housing in so many communities. My next question is that this part of the city, we have a lot of development coming in terms of commercial properties coming up, new residential properties coming up, and we have some constrictions on the infrastructure, the traffic infrastructure in this area. Have we carried out some impact assessment of this new development that is proposed to be coming into this?
We didn't complete any traffic analysis. We did, and we do recommend certain traffic measures as part of our overall, when you go back to the following up measures, that doing a traffic demand model and a number of other items. But we're also trying to design a project that is more walkable, that is more bicycle friendly, and that has connections that you can do with some commercial inside so that you're not just traveling out. The other one is if you have a local preference, if we can make that somehow a key factor in relationship to getting your school teachers and creating opportunities for people that work in the city. Part of the concept has been to cut down the commuters coming in, that they actually could live and work within the community here or the surrounding communities. But we haven't done traffic analysis at this stage. As I said, we came up with a soft number as far as what we can do it. And the way where that takes place is when you develop a specific plan, when you get that level of detail, which we aren't at yet. But we think you have a wonderful piece of property and some great opportunity, and it's something that can help achieve what everybody in the state is trying to do, trying to find a way to create attainable housing.
All right, I'd like our city manager to comment on the 5% legal local preference and also previous documents that have partially covered the traffic analysis that Surinder is asking about.
Yeah, so when the project was originally entitled, they did the environmental assessment, and so it included the transportation impact of 844 units. So a lot of that part has already been completed with the original entitlement for the property. And so if you developed it and kept within that 844 cap, that part would be a lot easier on traffic analysis. If you were to exceed that, then that opens up a lot more restudying and looking at the whole traffic impact issue. But when it was fully entitled, it looked at all those impacts, the traffic, greenhouse gas, all of that at the 844 level.
And then, can you talk about maybe the 5% local preference, which is legal? If we go too much into local preference, we might be illegal.
And are you talking about the
Housing for a local preference. We were talking about a local preference.
Yeah, Karen Tiedemann, our attorney, would have to dive into that. But with our below market rate housing program, we've talked a lot about local preference, and that is built into that program to where people that are living in Marina, work for the city of Marina, work for the school district, they get the primary, they get these certain number of points. And then if you just work in a Marina, you get a point. If you live in the county, you get a point. And so we already have those preferences built into our BMR program. And so I think working with our attorneys that we could definitely establish a preference locally. The important part when you look at that is, and they don't call it the Department of Fair Employment Housing, it's a new name at the state now. But in doing that, you can't violate any of those fair employment housing acts. So if you do local preference, it can't discriminate based on all your categories of discrimination. But we've done that analysis for our BMR program, and our attorneys were very comfortable. And so in a larger, broader spectrum, I don't think that would be an issue or a challenge at all with this project.
But we can't give 100% of the housing to local preference. My memory is that it was about 5%, and above that, because it's a state law, we're part of the state, and so we can't be patriarchal just to our city more than 5%. And then we had a comment via text that the hand mic is clipping out, and I think it's because we might not have it as close to our mouth. But if you're closer to your mouth, let's give that a try and see if it works better for the people at home.
Well, one of my thoughts was I was looking at this. This is which I see that careful that we not say, okay, B is down low, so that's going to be, multi-family housing. So let's put all of our low income people in this housing. Right. And so my experience with this is that housing has to be really spread out between all the neighborhoods so that there's a balance of, the market versus low income versus the workers. Because I don't think we want to create an environment of low income housing and have it separate unto itself. I think it's important that it be in all neighborhoods, because that's what our neighborhoods are like now. If I could, because I want to make sure that you understand that I wasn't trying to say that that's where affordable housing should go. We're looking more from the buildings type. And so where we look at farm-based code is another thing we've talked about, possibly the city looking at it. If we're going to ultimately have our higher buildings, that might be the best place to have them. So we really wasn't looking at what's affordable, what's not. We think all the neighborhoods should be diverse.
So if you have higher buildings, who lives in them? Is it multifamily or is it single family?
We see that area as an area that's prime for multifamily housing of some type in relationship to it. Your town housing, you may want to put that adjacent to your single family area, really looking at building type and compatibility.
Thank you. And speak very close into the mic, please.
Okay.
came forward.
Okay, yes, good evening. I'm gonna go back or jump back in on the neighborhood concept. And I think you said somewhere 4 to 6 neighborhoods are envisioned. 4 or 5 neighborhoods.
That's right. We're showing first part, 5 neighborhoods. The 83 and on the map behind me.
Okay, yeah, 5 neighborhoods. For the past month or so, I have discovered and been doing a little research into a new neighborhood that's now about 30 or 40% occupied in Tempe, Arizona. This is a 17-acre development. And the neighborhood is called Cul-de-sac Tempe. I don't know if has anyone heard of it? Cul-de-sac, like a road that ends in a circle or no exit. Cul-de-sac Tempe. And Tempe would be the city in Arizona. It's a development that broke ground in 2019. And it's designed for some pretty high density housing, about 700 units on 17 acres. So it's on up there. And one of the unique characteristics is no cars.
Commissioner St. John, this is for questions. If you're leading your question, that's fine. But we're gonna have comments later.
Oh, okay. All right. And my question was, could we designate or think about designating one of the 5 neighborhoods as a no cars neighborhood?
The answer is, again, in the planning process, you could. I mean, what we try to create is what we recommend regularly, and Congress of New Urbanism is one of the ones that uses the form-based code, and we try to create 15-minute neighborhoods so that the neighborhood is designed so you can walk everywhere in 15 minutes and get what you need. And so that's the kind of thing, maybe not restricting to no cars, but somehow designing it so that it's very limited car use. You don't have that many parking spaces. That's another. Eliminate the amount of parking spaces if you're doing multifamily homes. You give some sort of encouragement for using public transit, so the public transit can go through the neighborhood. So yes, those things, whether it's no cars or reduced cars, that can be part of the planning process of something you could identify. Mm-hmm. But we're still at the very preliminary identifying that we think that going with the neighborhood concept in some logical fashion is a good start.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a couple more questions. I think the first one may go to Elena, to the planning board. And I'm curious on the area that is south of E and west of D, the white space area that's open space right now that used to be the military shop and gas station. And just because that's a marquee piece of property that leads into Cypress Knolls, and is that owned by MPC or is that part of the dunes? Or somebody else?
Multiple. Part of it is MPC, part is the county. So there's different owners, but it's all owned by different organizations.
So I guess one of my questions overall is when looking at Cypress Knolls, not that I want to expand scope, but at the same time, that is a very visible entrance area and it's almost hiding the Cypress Knolls subdivision and what we're building behind it. And it's at some point, are we going to kind of try to rectify that, or are we just going to leave it with a multi-jurisdictional, non-developed area? I'll leave that as an open question, not for discussion today, but just to throw it out there. The second area is you're looking down and you're going west to east from California, right through the middle of D, and you're talking about the open space right there. That map does not do justice to the topography change. I mean, it's a significant, even with this type of multi-development. I think to address some of the other planning commissioners' comments, it would be hard without a significant cut and fill to actually build more than townhouses there, because the footprints are really, they were graded for quads with the military. So to change that would be, I think, difficult to do. So my question on that is, when you were conceptualizing kind of putting a medium to higher density along that corridor right there, what would be kind of the thought process of how to address that topography difference?
Let me just look real quickly. I'm looking at the open space. I'll start with the fact that, again, this is very conceptual and trying to organize. And we notice in driving it that we have major topography thing. We also really, from a long term now, my practice actually includes civil engineering, planning, landscape architecture. We don't see just using the pads as they are. We look for if there's an area that we can expand that pad to a larger area, if it doesn't have sensitive species, if it doesn't have a major visual element that we want to keep, that we may be making that pad differently. The pedestrian linkage is really conceptual. We want to find some kind of pedestrian. It may be that it has to go along the road, but these are, again, based on a handful of times visiting the site and looking at the topography and looking at planning concepts that we think make sense from producing a great neighborhood. That's what our thought process is, that you're going to go in and you're going to take a look. We were looking at D being probably more townhouse oriented and something along those lines. And the same is true with C. We weren't looking at this being, so we really anywhere from 2 stories to 5 stories. We were thinking the 5-story buildings would be more in the lower area that didn't have visual connection in relationship to that. And then when you're looking at areas adjacent to single-family residences or area with this topography, you may go with a product that's less dense, less intense.
Thanks. That was my first question. The next question is, again, I'm going to go to topography changes along the length of California along the border right there is, again, a significant drop of 10 to 15 feet, plus the 2 retention ponds that are sitting right there. We were looking at design development issues and what we're thinking about. And then the second part of that is we're going along Patton Parkway, and I'm going to liken this to the issues that happened, or have happened with Federal Beach Corporation along David Avenue when they went to put in workforce housing, and it caused a problem. Now, theirs was a problem issue. Ours is more of an opportunity. That we have a boundary line that's buried in the tree line, but how do we integrate that? Because again, that diagram doesn't do justice to that width of open space. Is again, conceptually, how do you address the California issue? And that?
Let me ask, can we move to the next slide after this one? So conceptually, you'll see what we did is we tried to create a buffer along California. So we have a major setback that we felt was going to be topographically oriented, that you wouldn't be able to build in those areas. So that's why you see the dark green, and that runs all along California, as I recall, and then curls around Peyton Parkway. And so that's part of the aspect of, and then taking a look at sensitivity where we could grade up and create some pads that you could build on. That was the concept and thought process. Not finalized, again, just creating some ideas to move forward. But we recognize both the topography change and the need to create some buffer system in there that you then can use the more interior part of the property.
We also noticed that there were, in addition to the slope, there was a pretty dense, vegetation, a lot of trees in that boundary area that not only is it difficult to develop, but it's just a perfect buffer preserving those mature trees.
I will tell you that a lot of those trees were not there when, and the shrubbery were not there when border closed. And I think that maybe that's my last comment is going back to the boundary systems. And I think it's more so those who don't know, because this happened here both when this was Patton subdivision before, and it actually was also at La Mesa subdivision up in the Canyon Park, up at the back end of the La Mesa subdivision. But that corridor that you have highlighted right down the middle, for those who have not been back in there for years, there are a whole series of playgrounds and parks that were intertwined. And the whole concept at the time was very similar when the military had subdivisions for residential, is that they had linked sets of playgrounds with a trail network that literally went actually all the way down to Preston Parkway. It was all interconnected because there was no roadway in California at the time. So I think that what this is really doing is not necessarily creating something new. It's just bringing back to light something that the military, when they built these housing areas, saw the same thing 75 years ago.
So I'm somewhat of a student of history and urban planning, and ultimately a guy named John Nolan, who the Congress of New Urbanism looks at, who was actually planning the communities in 1905 through about 1935. And that's one of the things we're trying to do now. We're trying to get back to those older communities where they're more walkable, they have mixed uses, they have some commercial in the areas, and that's exactly. And the military use it in some cases around the United States. And so that you're absolutely correct. It's back to the future.
I do too. I'm back to the future. My husband and I came here when the base was active, so I'm very familiar with Patton Park. We have many friends that lived out there. We're very familiar with the huge topography changes. My question would be, when you're looking at different housing types, and this relates back to what the mayor said, what about the multi-story buildings? Are those just apartments? And I would like to remind the public that multi-story buildings can be condos, and condos are very affordable because of the footprint of the building, and you're not having to have multiple foundations poured, et cetera. On top of which, if we only have 844 units, then we have a lot more space when you're talking condos, townhouses, row houses, connected single family homes where they're connected at the garage. You have more opportunity for open space for the connectivity that you're talking about. The Army was very good at that. That's why we have row houses throughout Marina, because we adopted those row houses. We didn't tear them down. We call them Preston Park and Abrams B. So, but I am concerned about the view that seems to have been mentioned of eliminating any cut and fill. And the reason why I'm concerned about it is, can I ask I'm moving up to a question. Thank you. The reason I'm concerned about it is that we're talking about, in these kinds of neighborhoods, you want people who are single and buying their first home. They're married with young children. Oh, grandma and grandpa want to retire there. And this is what they can afford because of their fixed income. So some of those people, specifically grandma and grandpa, can't deal with that topography. So how do you create an environment, a physical environment that will work for all the groups of people that you're trying to attract, and still in that physical environment maintain as much as possible the kinds of grading that you're talking about, which is little to none.
Let me start with the first one, which was we aren't choosing condos, apartments, or anything. We're looking at building forms. And yes, they can be condos and are outstanding. That may be one of the things because it creates ownership, and ownership is very important. The next thing is when we say we don't want mass grading, we're talking about where you go in and you grade the whole site and then take it out. We do anticipate that each neighborhood you're going to do very detailed focus grading in relationship to creating what works in that neighborhood and preserving some of the slope, but you are going to be having cut and fill to be able to achieve an area where you may want more density in a cul-de-sac neighborhood. So yeah, we want to make sure that's clear, at least in our recommendation. That also is fixed as we move forward. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to, what you bring up is a really good point because, mobility. I mean, when you do a specific plan, I would suggest you really look at mobility for all sectors of the community. As you mentioned, there's a lot of focus on bicycle ped facility, which is really important. But we realize, there are segments of the community that have limited mobility. So the mobility plan should take a look at all sectors of the community. I know that some plans talk about for the more limited mobility population, take a look at a shuttle program, perhaps as part of a DDM program for the entire project to provide that mobility that's needed. So, there's not a one-all solution for meeting mobility. And I think you bring up a good point that it's not just the young, it is also the elderly population.
Is that you and me?
Yeah, I'm acknowledge that comment every day.
Any more planning commissioner questions? Okay. All right, we go next. Okay, so let's go to city council folks. Councilmember Biala, and then Councilmember Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Planning Commission, thank you for those incredible questions. It's pretty phenomenal. So we're always trying to experiment with, this rigidity of just questions. So please bear with us. We're not supposed to be commenting, so I'll just use my question. So first, I guess it's on this map. Can someone point out where the VTC center is going to be? Because to one of the commissioners' point, when we look at these things, are we looking at things that are not specifically included in Cypress Knolls, but that are critical? We just need to have people understand where that piece is going to go.
Excuse me, there may be things, specific names that I don't know, but let me go up to the map and orient it from the standpoint.
Because this is a 4-story, 71 unit of veteran transition center. So if we could just.
Jim? This is being used, I think, for a lot of veteran type uses right now.
Hang on, guys, hold on, put you on.
Yes. I'm feeling like I could just use my hand. Lost it. I can tell you what the new development is, and there. So since we got back.
Yeah, just the VTC center, because this is really part and parcel of this Cypress Knolls.
Mike Snow from VTC will show you.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I just want this gentleman earlier, and so he's old friend now.
Yes, sir. If we get the map up, I could show you where all our facilities are.
And I'm only asking about the new development that it hasn't come up yet. Yes,
Called
great.
Fire Village, 71
You can use the mic, Mike. Use the mic, Mike.
Yes, sir. If I can get
From the light by the village, if we get the map back up. This is the 71 unit, basically apartment building that has been approved by planning commission and will be built as soon as the funding and process is in place.
Yes, last meeting we approved it.
No problem. It's we're actually gonna break ground here.
Show them your favorite dance.
It's I have 5 different ones. Which one? Might not be appropriate for the internet.
So Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. I'm the CIO of the Veterans Transition Center of California, based here in Marina, and we are off of Engine Drive, and we also have 20 duplexes on Hayes Circle. And the last 4 on the left-hand side are not occupied. Those will be demolished here in the middle of next month. And it'll be traditional build for the 71 unit apartment complex, which will take about 18 to 24 months. And those are permanent supportive housing, which is for low and extremely low veterans. It's coded only for these veterans that can qualify for that.
So Mike, we're just kind of filling time here.
Yeah, I'll start dancing.
Those veterans you just mentioned, they don't, or they do, or they don't need to be formerly homeless, or just if as long as they're veterans, the homeless is not a piece of the 71 unit plan.
That is correct, but we anticipate as our prior homeless vets graduate their program, the individual program, they'll move right into those apartments. Here we go.
The slide above gives the villages. Next slide up.
So VTC is centered here. That's Martinez Hall.
Okay, right there, right. That's a good.
Right. And this is because of this cutout is because VTC owns this land right here. Hayes Circle. This is Hayes Circle. It used to circle all the way through, but it obviously stops here. These last four here are going to be demolished next month. We have all the funding and the developer, and it's all going to plan. 71 unit complex is going right here, man.
Any questions while we have Mike up there, Kathy? All right, regarding BTC?
No, and I guess I'm asking the
Okay, Mike.
Pat.
Thank you very much.
Pat folks, is this not something we need to consider when we're developing Cypress Knolls?
The answer is yes. You should consider all the surrounding land uses in relationship to what's going on.
Okay.
Now, again, we're focusing more on farm. Like in this case, as you said, I think actually this plan, if I can make it work. Well, I guess rather use my finger. This is the remnants of the residential units that were on there. So ultimately what goes in here is compatible with that. This right here are uses that, is housing for veterans. And ultimately, and then you have a number of other areas. I don't see it being incompatible for what we're trying to achieve. I could think it would be incompatible. Ultimately, and of course, we know veteran housing is extremely important no matter where we go. And that, I think, is one of the things Mike also wanted to be here today to talk about incorporating more of that in this plan. We're creating a framework that can go in a lot of different directions. And ultimately, how that comes is part of the specific plan process that we're recommending.
Yeah, because it's a wonderful building. It looks very modern, et cetera, and it's 4 stories. So as you were saying, you make plans based on the types of buildings that sit next to each other. I'm just saying that it's significant. It's a significant development. And so we
Trying to stick to questions, Kathy.
Yeah.
I know it's hard.
I know.
And Matt had some input.
Okay, so, my question has been answered that we should probably put these things when we know they're coming up too. I mean, if our idea is we're going to incorporate all of the surrounding areas, and we should put those on the maps.
I agree.
Yeah.
And so when you think about what we're trying to do is think in form and
Yeah.
how things fit together in their
Yes.
form
Yes,
and adding those things. But this was a fairly quick study for us to come in to help
Yes.
work with the city. But
Totally.
I agree with you
Yeah.
100%.
okay, can you go to, I guess it's slide 10, I don't know, it's the one with the Sangillia? No, but there was one with the greenways. Yeah.
The greenways is the slide after this one.
Okay. Okay. Now, from the looks of it, you've done a marvelous job to sort of maintain green space that coincides with the Sangillia, because we have obsessed over this. So does this, and it looks pretty much like there's hardly any Sangillia left for us to mitigate for, correct? Is that what this thing is showing us?
I would say that you're preserving somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of the
90%.
Julia.
That is
And that's
fabulous.
but that's before you actually go to the detailed grading. I mean, again, this is conceptual. Let's use this as a framework, guiding principles, and then get in. That's when you bring the engineer to say, okay, if we want to achieve affordable housing and I got to put so many units on this is the kind of pad I need, the size of the pad. But this gives us a framework to go and preserve possibly up to 90%.
Right. That's phenomenal, because we have spent so long trying to figure out how to accommodate Sangillia and new developments. Okay. Then my next question is on patent. Can you bring up the slide before, I think, with the traffic flow? If I had the presentation, I could tell you, but yes, good. Okay, so it's been brought up already, the issues with Crescent Street. And this is maybe a question for Lane or Matt. There is another place beside Crescent Street further up that can connect to Rheindaler from Patton Park. It's now closed off and has been closed off for many years. Can that be used as an automobile access street? Because I think it was closed off for pedestrian issues. I'm not sure. Can that be another connector street?
You would have to look at that for our transportation master plan. My understanding is there's a pedestrian access. It's been closed up, but there's a house there. You'd have to condemn the house, I think, and
I
be
don't
able to
think there
get a
is.
roadway through there.
Yeah. When I look through it, I can see right through. But at the end,
That's kind of
maybe?
outside the scope. of
Yeah,
what we're
no,
doing tonight.
no, I understand that, but I think that the whole issues of the traffic is critical in this design. So that's why I'm asking, I'm thinking about other avenues because as we've said about the Crescent Street. Okay, let's see. Are we thinking now, this is in the staff report and it's saying about the sales of affordable housing. I don't know whether that, because it's in the staff report, is that something we can ask about?
I'm not familiar. I didn't write the staff report, so I think we would call staff up for that.
Oh, okay. Just wanted
Allison?
to kind of in my own mind, understand what affordable sales of homes are. Are we looking at maybe under 500,000? Because we've often heard this and then they turn out to be $800,000.
So
So
before you start, Allison, to answer that, we're getting an email from our city attorney to try to stay on track to what's in the staff report. So if we start talking about access to other neighborhoods that aren't part of this, we just have to be careful because the public didn't know we'd be talking about that.
okay. Right. But this is in the staff report.
Yeah.
Affordable sales.
And actually, Lane, would you like to talk about that?
Oh, I think this is why ultimately we're making the recommendation that we are, because you look at all the challenges to the property of prevailing wage. We've talked about that. Existing infrastructure that's failing. It's going to be a significant cost of putting new roadways and all that infrastructure in the property, removing the blighted homes. And with all those stacked onto it, and then you want to build a product that's affordable. So that's going to be the challenge. And to do that, it's going to require creativity. It's going to require thinking outside the box. It's not going to be an easy issue. But I think we got great consensus at the charrette, and the council has said this for years. Is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. And so we're going to have to be focused on that goal of affordable housing, and we're going to have to make some hard choices to be able to achieve that goal.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I completely agree. So we have to be really realistic because if this is our goal. But anyway, my last question. So we have these colored areas for the neighborhoods. What advantage is there for us to think in terms of these neighborhoods? Does this mean like we start with D first and then until that's completed and then we go to C? Or if you're saying that even within these districts, we can have every one of the kinds of facilities that we had some preferences for, why do we put it in this manner?
This is an organizing tool. And that's why I call a framework plan. Actually, what you do is you start with looking at now doing a detailed plan on what's in each neighborhood. And that's what the specific plan is. And the specific plan is allowed by state law. But it gives you that opportunity to go in and start looking at the urban design element, almost an architectural element. It looks at the detail of traffic flow, of pedestrian movement. It looks at how things connect. So our recommendation is here's a framework. It may not be that these neighborhoods all stay exactly like. Maybe that connectivity to Crescent doesn't happen, but ultimately it's a matter of a starting point that you then can give to staff and consultants with expertise that ultimately can put together a detailed plan that will then go before the Planning Commission and the City Council and then be able to answer those questions in detail. This is really the start, and it's really the organization. And it was all about trying to see, is there consensus in this city to build this type of housing and to go to the next step. And that's what our recommendation is. We think there is. Here's the proof of where it is. And ultimately, and then we think here's some organizing tools to go there.
Okay, so it's conceptually organizing. It's not that we're going to say we're going to phase in one and then go to B, or
Correct.
we're only going to put certain housing in one of the neighborhoods. And so it's completely just a conceptual thing. We're not going to name these different names of neighborhoods or anything.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Councilmember Fisher?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also have several questions. The first one is about the other map with the trails. Sorry. and thank you for the presentation and all the questions that people already have asked. Pedestrian connection. I love seeing the trail into the Sea Haven neighborhood next to it. And this might be more a question for staff, that actual neighborhoods bordering California Avenue there, what's already constructed. There's all these walkways have been designed in the neighborhood, but there's no connection to downtown, to California Avenue or to the north. There it ends in a wall and California Avenue ends in a dead end. So are there plans to change that? Because it will be very important to connect it here.
Once again, this is just a conceptual plan. That's something that will definitely be considered as part of the overall master plan. But at this time, we won't have a direct answer. But obviously, connectivity to the rest of Central Marina and the dunes and the Sea Haven actually is in the guiding principles for this document. We heard that loud and clear from the community on January 7th.
So my question then is, you can design it like it has been designed in Sea Haven, but how do we make sure that it does connect to the surrounding areas?
Exactly. And that will be addressed in more detail in the specific plan for this project.
Guido, is it unrealistic to expect that we're going to punch through Sea Haven in a way that Sea Haven was never planned to be punched through?
I don't know if we're here necessarily to address that for today in terms of Sea Haven. So, but once again, to focus on high level, the concepts in the principle, get feedback from the commission and council, and then use that as a springboard when we're crafting the RFP and then selecting a consultant to work with us. And so, yeah, we would not be able to answer, that specific, but obviously connectivity, and then every general plan after 2010 requires complete streets to be adopted and to be implemented, which is bike, ped, and different types of mobility within the city.
So I'm just looking at these maps and hearing her question, and I just want to know if we're in the realm of realism to expect these arrows to actually occur.
Yeah, in terms of trying to protect the Gilliam and using that as a basis to have connectivity of trails, absolutely. And that is a guiding principle that's in the document before you tonight.
Right. And I could say on that Third Avenue connection, we talked about the Fortag, that's a major connection of a major trail through Sea Haven. So that is a major. And then up here at the northern part is their Arroyo. And again, those are all visioned to be major connection points.
So can I ask, so that will be changed? Yes, because, and so the connection, because the green arrow there, the northern one, almost coincides with the Muse, the walkways that have been built into Sea Haven. But for some reason, it dead ends. So.
Yeah, that's something we can certainly take a look at as part of the master plan.
Then I'm happy. Thank you. Okay.
Well, I'm not trying to be officious or just trying to keep this at a higher level.
Yes.
And so that I'm hopefully addressing your question. But obviously, these are things that will definitely get addressed in a very lengthy planning process. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, my next question. Page 31. That's for the consultants. I think. Consider the housing needs of the community's special needs populations. And one that is mentioned is female heads of households. Can you give some examples how they need special consideration?
No, that's a good question. The part of this is coming out of the housing element criteria. The housing element has identified certain categories of households as special needs. And you see I listed basically the various categories. And female head of household is defined as a special needs population. But the main issue there is many times female head of household with children, they struggle with childcare needs if they're a single household working at the same time. So usually they need more affordable housing or workforce housing. So that's identified as a housing need by the state. And housing elements often are asked to identify how do you address these various special needs population. And in many communities, based on the surveys, they determine there's a fair percentage of female heads of the household in your community. I don't know what the situation is for the city of Marina. I know you'll be embarking on housing elements soon, but your analysis will probably identify what, using census information or American census information, be able to identify what are those populations, are they in significant numbers that you should address. So that's why I listed it there.
So it could also be described as single
Oh,
parents.
yeah, single, yeah.
Not so much for female.
Yeah, usually refers to as, single.
Okay, thank you. My next question, that's on page 32. Can you please explain what this means? Evaluate a possible form-based code approach for Cypress Knolls.
Yes, I talked about it earlier. Form-based code is another form of zoning, and it was evolved in the 80s by Andres Dwang, and I apologize for giving you a little bit of history, but just the way I do things, saying that our old zoning approach of segregating various types of residential, multifamily, commercial, industrial really isn't working anymore. What we really need to do is to start looking at how we can look at the form of buildings and buildings fitting together and then uses within inside those buildings. So a form-based code is a new type of zoning that basically could be used in a site like this to look at compatibility in the surrounding area. It also emphasizes both the private and public sector road systems and property areas in relationship. So it literally is a new tool in the planner's box. But when I say new, it's actually now 30 years old. And one that we think would work very well in the site. It's architecturally driven.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And on the same page, it mentions solar. For single-family homes, solar already is a requirement. Is it also for other building structures? I'm not familiar with the requirements.
Pardon, I missed your second part of your question.
Single-family homes already are required to have solar installations.
With the new, uniform.
So is that also for other structures already or not? Is that, or did you put it in here because we need to pay attention for structures for which it's not required? I'm not, I want to say the answer is yes, but I don't want to say definitively for certain.
I think the issue is that it may not be required. We're recommending it's something you should be looking at in all areas. So if you have a community center, you may not be required to put solar there, but look at that and say you should do it. If you have a commercial area. So we're looking at anything you can to reduce energy consumption.
Yes, and
even so my friend over here, even things that measure how the performance is and standards like that. So
one thing I will add is a lot of cities are going above and beyond the minimum city requirement on state requirements as defined by the Uniform Building Code or the Energy Code. So you hear about cities adopting what's called the REACH codes, which then identify additional sustainability or electrification requirements beyond the state standard. So, Cypress Knolls could be a location or even citywide for all new construction where you can promote higher standards than what the minimum the state now requires.
Thank you. And I'm definitely in favor of that as well. So thank you. One more question about the new fire station. Where is that planned to be?
We're going to look to the city manager and city staff. We did see some a couple times, but please take it away.
Yeah, so it's roughly down there on the corner of California and Imogen. Again, this is such a high level conceptual. You don't have a specific place, but it's on that corner.
Somewhere there, huh? Yes. So, okay. That's more for the details later, but thank you. My last question. Has it been considered to design the new civic center, the city hall, council chambers, community center at Cypress Knolls? Because this is, as the staff report correctly states, almost the geographic center of the city.
One of the reasons we went through to do guiding principles was to look at how the property should be used. And what we kept on hearing back from a number of leaders was this should be used for housing in a complete community. So the answer would be, based on the guidance we're hearing from the interviews and the community, no, the idea of this being used as a civic center was not brought up as a key factor.
And
Okay.
even above that, when this property was first entitled, those were discussions back then, and the direction from the council then was absolutely not. They did not want to build all the new facilities, all the new homes, all the new civic centers, and all the new high growth areas. They wanted to keep the civic center down in the original part of downtown area. So that was a council decision back at that point in time, also not to locate the civic center there.
And is that a decision that can still be changed? Yes, okay.
Absolutely.
Because I think it will be such a missed opportunity to not even look at it, to look at the options. Yeah. But this is later. And this is a comment, I think. So these were my questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Any more?
No,
Councilmember,
these were my questions. Thank you.
Councilmember McCarthy?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm enjoying going last for a change. Brian Hanson, your enthusiasm really comes through. So I hope I can say I'm equally as passionate and enthusiastic about this project. Couple questions. First for staff. The original specific plan or entitlement still exists, right? And so if somebody wanted to pay us $30 million for the land and say they wanted to build this year, we could move forward with that. Is that correct? Or?
We could, yes.
Okay. Are those documents available on our website? And I think there's two schools of thought. One is that plan was terrible. We don't even want to look at it. And the other is maybe there's something to be learned from what people were thinking at that time.
Yes, we can dig up those documents. I'm not sure exactly where. I'm sure they're somewhere on the website, but
okay,
we could make them more.
And I will tell you that we can review those documents.
Okay.
And they did, we can answer some of the questions on it too, if you're interested.
Okay. The Echelon tribe, I saw there was some reference to some tribal issues in the staff report. And I don't know if we have an expert or a tribal consultant on our staff, but is there any evidence that Echelon tribe or any tribal group was on this land in history? My very limited understanding is that there really wasn't any value to being here because it was deserty and there wasn't water and it just wasn't a fun place to be.
I started my career actually in anthropology as an archaeologist working for local government. So I would say that is blatantly not true.
Okay.
Ultimately, you'll find cultural and prehistoric occupation up and down the coast, and everything was used and used as a purpose. It is something I'm enthusiastic about the project and the things, but I'm also enthusiastic about understanding Native American cultures. So there is really activity up and down the coast, and it's been documented over the years. And it would have been, in some fashion, this process. Was there a village there? Maybe not, but that doesn't mean it didn't have some importance in the cultural distribution and exploiting the natural environment for those people.
That's awesome. I would be very interested in learning more about that for sure. The form-based codes. Yes.
I was just going to answer your question, Councilmember McCarthy. As part of the master plan process, we would be required to implement SB 18 and AB 52 to further explore that issue in terms of, whatever cultural resources were there or impacted, would not be impacted. So once again, that would be a more deeper dive once the specific plan consultant is picked and we do a deeper dive into the EIR. So
awesome. Thank you, Guido. Form-based codes, you heard some other questions from the dais, and I'll admit I'm not very familiar with form-based codes. How important is it, do you think, for the decision makers to understand form-based codes before we decide whether we're going to go forward with that?
I think it's very important to understand. I don't think you're being asked to say, am I going to do a form-based code on this property right now? We're saying when you look at doing a specific plan, look at exploring the concept of form-based code versus traditional zoning, that it may offer some very specific opportunities in relationship to this. As you go on, if that ends up being one of the choice, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's being thought in your general plan, that understanding and becoming educated on the form-based code and how that tool can be used. It particularly is good in relationship to downtown areas and village areas. So that would be my answer to that.
And last question for now is, the staff report mentions that some of these site concepts and frameworks should inform kind of the development of this specific plan. And as I talk to people, I heard people talk about wanting us to be innovative, progressive, and cutting edge housing technologies. I guess the first part of the question is, are those things that you heard as well as you?
Yes.
Okay. And the second part is, I haven't really seen a lot of those cutting edge technologies so far discussed. And I'm just wondering how in depth we should go into those before we start looking at a specific plan development.
I would say that again, that's why the guiding principles includes those statements. And ultimately, that's when you get into the specific plan, you'll want to be exploring anything and everything you can. And whether it's new technology for driving, for controlling energy, or whether for any of those things. But again, that's the detail that you want to get in when you do a specific plan. But that's why we do have it, clearly stated in the guiding principles that you make that a factor in relationship to it. And we could add to it in a couple other places, but I think that it's sufficient to get the ball rolling.
Okay. Since I'm going to get yelled at by the mayor for not keeping this question oriented enough, so I promise this is the last one, but I'm just thinking of microgrids, for example. Maybe they take a huge parcel of land to implement, but none of these diagrams really depict that or account for that. And so again, I'm just, how granular do we want to get before we go into these concepts and move into the specific plan phase? If we know we're going to need something that's going to take a quarter of this land, and yet we haven't accounted for it in any of our concepts, I'm just wondering if we haven't dived deep enough into some of these cutting edge technologies.
I don't think what we're showing you limits any of that aspect of, so you say, I want to start a specific plan process. Do I have to have each one of these neighborhoods be a residential neighborhood, or can I use something for innovative energy, distribution of energy, or something of that nature? You have that flexibility as you go into the planning process. I know for microgrid, so I don't want to try to get into it, but you're looking at the bigger system and how it fits in there. But this concept of moving forward doesn't limit you from doing anything else.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
He's blanking in Spanish.
If I can add just one other comment to it, I think we need to be clear that when we talk about bringing a consultant onto this project, it's not like we're hiring a consultant to do the housing element. We're probably talking 20, 30, 40, 50 meetings involved with the consultant, the community, maybe more charrettes with the council, with the planning commission. And so there's going to be so many opportunities to bring up these specifics that you brought up here, and a lot more that we haven't covered. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Brian. Let's go to Councilmember Biala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make it real quick. In all of the kind of pictures that we were shown about the different styles, and just as what our city manager was saying about, if we want affordable units, it's going to be a challenge. And so when I think about tiny homes, I didn't see any pictures, the thinking out of the box. How are we going to get something under $500,000 if we're just going to be thinking the usual? So,
well, first of all, we did enter and show images of tiny homes. They just didn't in the classification and the voting process we went through. They didn't come up. I mean, even out in a small neighborhood, that's an opportunity to look at.
Right.
So none of those are up. But we're trying to find an approach to get guiding principles, and then can we move to a next step, which we think we have. I don't think that you're limited to those pictures. Those pictures we're just saying based on the consensus we had at that meeting, but just as your city manager stated, and it's very true, that when you get in the planning process, you're probably looking at, minimally a 2-year process, of which you're going to have anywhere from 20 to 40 meetings with the community, and they're going to come up with a lot of ideas of what they like and what they don't like.
Right.
I will say that from an affordability standpoint, the very first challenge is owning the land and cutting out that land cost. And that's one thing you have going for you that nobody else has.
Yes, right. But when you show people the wish list without considering the price, then we're going to get a different answer. So I was just thinking, that we did not maybe include enough sort of the smaller affordable home types in that survey or that charrette. But we will have a chance, as you say, later.
Yeah, certainly. One thing I will mention is probably the closest concept to a tiny home, or what's called missing middle housing, sometimes smaller homes. The cottage court picture,
That was.
that was the highest rated picture. And I think when we got asked, why do you rate it so high? It was, a lot of it was, it looks like it will be more affordable, more accessible. So the affordability was not just the appearance of the cottage court, but I think what attracted a lot of the folks that voted for that photo was it looks like it could be a good form of more affordable
But
housing.
less dense
Yeah.
use of the land usually means it's going to be higher cost.
It depends on how you structure the financing with the developer, and that's a kind of a detail of the financing plan that you could get into.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And the type of financial assistance is available at the state level too. There's a lot of different, there's actually one thing I'll tell you there's a number of new housing programs that are out there that's even hard to sort out, that's been announced in the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Kathy. I have 3 questions and then we'll go to public comment. On page 30, you talk about the dance between the Cypress Knoll specific plan, which we don't have yet. We have an old one, but we're talking about doing a new one, and the general plan update. So can you kind of summarize what you say on page 30 about how they interweave and the sequencing between those 2 documents?
So what we've worked out, it's at least internally, is to have very clear policies in the general plan that then tie back to the specific plan. So in the general plan, there would be policies that say, encourage missing middle housing, have a trail system within the project, make sure the project is accessible to Central Marina and to the Dunes, Sea Haven. Have those policies, have very clear policies in the general plan, and then reference back. And if we get far enough along in the process for the Cypress Knolls project, potentially we could analyze the Cypress Knolls within the general plan EIR and then tear off the analysis of the Cypress Knolls master plan. So that would be the interconnection, but they would be in 2 separate timelines, so they don't necessarily interfere with each other. But that's how I've done it in other cities. It seems to be effective. But if you have at least the general plan framework, a general idea of how much density, then they can both be interconnected in that way.
Will they both be progressing concurrently?
Well, the general plan, we're on a pretty aggressive schedule. It kind of depends on how far we get with the potential housing grants we're going to be applying for. But we will be actively trying to pursue both projects at the same time.
Okay. My next question is the request for proposals on page 30B paragraph. It talks, the latter part of that page talks about the city bearing the cost of doing a Cypress Knoll specific plan. And my question is that because we want the city and the community to say what we want in a specific plan before we turn it over to developers who might bid to build what we want. And is it possible that might produce a plan that's unrealistic, even though the RFP will include an economic analysis?
I think Marina is very blessed to own the property. I mean, that as Brian alluded to, that you control your own destiny. I've worked for some cities that don't hardly control any property. So controlling the property, controlling the specific plan, having key economic impact analysis done as part of the specific plan to make sure it is financially feasible, I guarantees that you will have a product that you can actually build. So that's the general thought process.
Okay.
So you control your destiny by being the landowner. So,
all right. So on page 31, it talks about the this process, request for proposal. So after tonight, is the next phase to pay a consultant to do a specific plan through we issue an RFP. Hey, consultants, we want someone to do our specific plan, and then we hire someone to do our specific plan, and we move into that process. Is that the next major phase? Is an RFP consultant and that agency does our specific plan?
Yes.
And what year, what time frame will the RFP be issued, and will that the consultant be doing the specific plan?
I would defer to the council and the city manager. We do have a budget cycle going on right now, so
Not only do we have that, but that is still one of the top priorities of the city council. So if we get direction tonight to move forward with putting out an RFP, we will do that. We have 300,000 already budgeted, and we intend to go after some of these grants that we think we can get up to $1 million. And so if we get direction tonight, we'll start working on that RFP, but hopefully have it ready to go out in 60 days.
All right. So if the general plan takes 2 years and we're starting, and if tonight we said go ahead with this, then wouldn't it be true that they would be concurrently developing?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Those are my only questions. So now let's go to people here in the public, and then we'll go to the public who is online. So just step up to the podium if you'd like to speak here tonight for up to 3 minutes. And you can see there's a timer on the screen for those of you in person and at home.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Grace Silva Santella, 34-year resident of Marina. I'm looking forward to this project someday, as my husband and I are actually, in fact, thinking about this would be a really fabulous place to downsize to. So first, Councilmember Fisher, please don't take offense, but I would strongly urge you to not desert Central Marina relative to civic centers. You have an entire development north of Marina Station. It's really critical that you stay true and loyal to Central Marina. I'm surprised that the transportation does not show Patton Parkway extension out to Dalmani Avenue. I know that the city manager has referenced it. Going forward, you have to show that. Having participated in the workshop that you all were at, the group I was a part of did speak to the Patton Parkway extension going out to Dalmani Avenue. I really appreciate the concerns that have been mentioned about affordable housing for ownership, but I want to speak, and I just referenced it relative to my husband and myself, that there is a population we're failing to speak about, and that is the older population. And you recently spoke at a council meeting about how we're starting to lose younger youth in Marina, and that we have an aging population, and that is going to be people like my husband and myself who someday will want to start buying downsizing, and we will want to be looking for a smaller footprint to live in. My family just about 2 years ago had to start looking for a retirement community for my mother to move into. And we chose one in Salinas called ID Park. ID Park is 3 stories high. It is close to Nob Hill. It is close to CVS. It is close to apartments, and it is close to single family homes. So it's a great, it to me is a visual of how we can develop this to meet a mix of incomes and ages. And then tonight, my biggest surprise is to learn that we are going to be limited to 844 units in this project. That is a big challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grace. Next, just stand up, go to the podium. And good evening, Jay.
Thank you very much. And thank you. I actually have had contact with several of the people who are here, and it will be entirely up to the city and everything, all of the actual things that happen in terms of what kinds of buildings and where they go and all those sorts of stuff. My only interest is in getting us to go toward the state-of-the-art performance, state-of-the-art what is possible for the efficiency of the buildings themselves. We know how to build them much more efficiently than code requires. The indoor air quality for the people that live in them, in particular with the smoke and the fires and the things that are coming, the resilience to that smoke and fires and power outages and temperature changes. It is just something, whereas codes tend to be, you have to do it at least this well. Below that, it's not, it fails. I'm suggesting that we would have, in addition to design guidelines, which I'm sure you will have, performance guidelines that say whether it's a tiny home or a 10-story multifamily building, it needs to perform up to this kind of standard in terms of energy efficiency, indoor air quality, and resilience to smoke, fire, heat, cold, power outages. Thank you for the time, and thank you to those of you who I've already met with and who are taking advantage of the possibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jay. Okay, let's check online. We have just 5 people, and we'll see if any of them wish to speak. Jeff Markham, let's start with you. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. My first question is, where are the coyotes going to go? I'm being facetious, but there is a reestablished wildlife community that's established within Cypress Knolls right now. So being compassionate and figuring out how to deal with that's going to be a good thing. I also agree with the Patton Parkway extension. I think it's going to be essential to the successful ingress and egress from an 800+ housing community. And so I think doing the project without that would really be a mistake. I think from an overall design perspective, I'm a little disappointed that Marina High School wasn't more integrated into the design. I understand there are, school site safety issues and things like that, and it's beyond the scope of the original project. But if you, go down there in the morning and you watch, this river of kids going in and out of Patton, California, and Cypress and Marina Heights as they come down from Sea Haven, getting them flowing through that space and providing recreational opportunities for them, places where they can better integrate with all aspects of the community would be something I wish that the design had done a better job of. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's now go to Doug Yount. Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right. Thank you. As folks may know, I'm Doug Yount. I'm not representing the Dunes project tonight. I'm sort of speaking for myself. As you may know, I've had significant experience with the entitlement and planning and development of Cypress Knolls in the past. And I just wanted to say, first of all, thanks to Council and the Planning Commission for taking the time and getting expertise as well to focus on guiding principles and visioning for the Cypress Knolls property. There was a point in time when the vision of an entire community of senior housing from active adult all the way to CCRC was appropriate, but the community needs to decide what's appropriate now and appropriate for the community, many, many years later. And I think looking at the report, looking at what the focus is on these guiding principles, it's, in my opinion, sort of spot on what Marina needs. The focus and trying to solve the middle income, missing middle, if you will, I think is laudable. It is very difficult to do affordable by design. It takes significant resources, both private and public, but I think it's in my opinion, the right way to focus, particularly on this property with different types of single, cottage style or owner occupant and multifamily owner occupant, maybe even some rental. But moving forward, just for whatever my 2 cents, I would suggest the following. I've been involved in development and master plan community and others for nearly 40 years now. And I would suggest a couple of things. One is seriously consider technology of modular housing off-site to combat the significant cost of prevailing wage. As you know, the prevailing wage can add as much as 60 to 70% increase in cost of housing. Secondly, let the developer versus the city prepare the specific plan once you've chosen them through an RFQ, RFP process, and also that you've developed very strong guiding principles and vision. So stay firm on the guiding principles, but stay flexible on the design. Also have a dual track process of entitlements of the specific plan linked with detailed pro formas and business terms so that there's financial reality to the planning concepts. And then finally, I would suggest maybe including some form of senior housing in there to meet, because that's still a need in the community, as one speaker even noted. So thank you for the opportunity to comment, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we'll give everyone in person and online another moment. If you'd wish to speak, raise your hand or come up to the podium. Let's go to Tommy Balea and then we'll go to Mike. Welcome, Tommy.
I'm unmuted now. Yeah, it looks like a
Yes.
nice project. I mean, it's in its preliminary stages. Sure, I'm assuming there's going to be changes along the way. I mean, there's no liquor stores or 7-Eleven, so that sounds good to me. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in peace like that? It seems really nice. I hope that labor-wise, I've been hearing different things, that it could be done. If it is prevailing wage, so be it. And hopefully the labor's local. I mean, what I see driving around, all this construction is from way far away. San Francisco, Sacramento. I mean, I can't even remember the area codes on those trucks. I mean, it's try to keep Marina sustainable by getting local workforce, but you guys want this project done overnight. I mean, obviously you're going to farm out to the one that gets it done the fastest. And unfortunately, it doesn't become sustainable. You're reaching all the realms of the world to get labor so you can finish this project. I mean, and as far as what I'm seeing in some of these other new developments, I see a lot of empty homes. They're sold, they're not for rent, and there's nobody in the home. It's like they live in the Silicon Valley. They're buying here for $1 million. It's a steal for them. But do we want a lot of empty homes that they just come, just enjoy it for a day or a week, and then go back where they actually live? But in San Francisco, they passed a measure called Measure Ramp, and for every vacant property that's in the city limits of San Francisco, besides paying property tax, you will pay an additional tax because that building is vacant. Santa Cruz tried to pass that, it failed, but it is coming south. And most cities are becoming very innovative. I'm not for it. In particular, you're paying property tax, but now you're going to end up paying an additional property tax because you bought this building, but it's vacant. There's nobody in it. And that's what I'm already starting to see in Sea Haven and a few other of the developments. I mean, we're going to end up like a Carmel. And boy, Carmel would reap the value of millions of dollars in taxes. But as far as Second Avenue, you guys keep mentioning that on this project. I would make Second Avenue just right along the freeway and make it one way north, and on the other side, one way south. Just hug the freeway and make it just one lane. And forget about tearing down that hill and taking out all those trees. Just hug it right along. And you can make your choice. Take the freeway or take Second Avenue and go into downtown Marina. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Tommy. Okay, anyone? Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I gave each of you a letter from BTC outlining some of our desires. This seems more specific for the specific plan, a little bit early. Look forward to being involved in this process as we go forward. I hope you read it and just keep these things in mind in the future. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mike. Get some answers to those that were raised by the public. Did anyone note any questions? I did not. All right. Thank you, public, for all those comments. And let's go back to Planning Commission for anything you want to say. Questions, comments? He seems very eager, so it should be good.
Maybe I should just sit down and be quiet down.
So one of the things I like to see us do, I'd like to see it in the RFP, and I'd like to see it pursue it, is all of the non-traditional kinds of construction that are available now that weren't available many years ago. One of the public mentioned modular homes. Modular homes sit on foundations. I have one in my street. You'd never know. And, you know, who knows how much money that would save. There's tilt up. You can take modular and you can stack them into an apartment house. There's all kinds of new technologies, and I'd like to see that incorporated into the RFP.
Thank you, Vic.
Yeah, I would definitely like to second the modular building concept. You won't even know the difference. You can't even tell the difference other than the speed of construction and the accuracy of construction when it's modular built in factories and hauled aside and erected and joined together. Anyway, you put them on foundations, concrete foundations, and you can't tell the difference other than how fast it went together and how perfect it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciated the comments by Grace Silva Santella when she was talking about the importance of including seniors. I don't think you need to have a senior village kind of thing. What you need is universal design in your buildings so that everything that's constructed has the ability to house someone with special needs where they can age in place. So for instance, lower light switches, higher electrical outlets, wider hallways, bathrooms that you can turn a wheelchair in. They can still be beautifully designed. Nobody knows the difference except the person that has to live there who's in a wheelchair. My home is not accessible. My husband is aging rapidly. We live in a 2-story house. He can barely climb the stairs, but it will never accommodate even a walker because our bathrooms are too small for someone to turn around in. So those are things that I would like when we go out for an RFP to be considered in building design, the kinds of buildings that we want, that all of it include universal design. That also includes low thresholds so that people don't trip. I've taken 3 falls in the last 5 years, bruised my lung, gave myself my first black eye. So I understand that, even though I'm very physically fit at 71, there are still things that can happen. And they don't just happen when you're 70, they can happen when you're 20 as well. So that's probably my biggest concern, other than what I mentioned earlier about how much cut and fill, and making sure that when we decide what building is going to go where, we don't decide that, the developer that comes in decides that. But when that's decided, that it isn't, that's where we're putting all the people who live in apartments who can't afford to buy. You can do condos where some of it is for sale and some of it is for rent, and nobody knows the difference. And that's how you integrate financially your neighborhood, is by creating homes, dwelling units that are available, whether they're for rent or for purchase, all in the same neighborhood. I was impressed that I felt that that's what was trying to be accomplished here in this conceptual plan. And I really appreciated that. So thank you very much for the presentation and the hard work you did.
Thank you, Nancy.
Great to meet you. Okay. Just a minute. Thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have, I think, batches of comments. Okay, so with respect to higher density, the higher density apartments that you were mentioning, I think some of those could be for purchase. Just like the cottage homes and some of the tiny homes that we've been discussing. And then with respect to the single homes, the single family homes, I think there's an opportunity that because we've got the limited 844 units that we're able to have, I think some of the single family homes might have large enough yards that we might be able to incorporate the 2 ADUs that the state of California has said that they could put on their property. I'm trying to frame everything not like a question. So you guys stop me if I'm not. So I think
Audrey, you can ask questions or give comments.
Okay, good. So here's my question. So could the city build or could people build those family homes with a large enough yard space that 2 ADUs would be able to be placed on these properties, and would those ADUs count toward the 844?
No, let's wait because we've got to get it. It's not just for us.
I think we need to be online too.
And for the recording so we can see this later.
Two things that I would say is one, the answer is yes, it could be incorporated ultimately, but again, ADUs are allowed by state law once you have if you do a single family. All of those things are all options for sales, all options. And I also want to emphasize, we don't think that, there may be an opportunity to go a lot more than the 844. And that's one of the things that we've come back with and said, particularly where the state is going. So, I think that's your bottom number of units, and then we'll look to see what the top, or your consultant will look to see what the top means. But the answer is yes, we can plug in all those things, or the consultant can when they get hired.
So I think you answered my, because I was thinking about the apartment building that's up by 3 stories, and eliminated some of the parking, but the city had to allow them to do that because they offered very low income housing as part of their application. And then I think this is my last one with respect to the base realignment and closure. I'm wondering if there are several opportunities that exist for federal funding. And the big question I have, I don't know where to look to is if Jimmy Panetta has any role to play in this at all. So, and I'm hoping that his answer is yes, and he comes swinging in with big checks for this project. That's it. Thank you.
All right, so we'll go to our city manager and take the Jimmy Panetta question seriously. If we can get federal, if it's expected, we can or we can't get federal help.
I think what we're developing here is something very unique. We have the potential to break down a lot of stereotypes and absolutely our intent is to go to the state, to the federal, to HCD, to any level that we can get and show them our plan, show them our story, show them our goals, and see what grants and funding, because our pitch is going to be, here's a model you can do throughout the state, throughout the country.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question? Because we keep hitting on that 844 number. And my understanding was, going back to base reuse plan, when the base first closed, the plan was implemented to ensure that we replace the economic engine that was lost when the base closed, which included jobs and housing. But it was also restricted by the amount of water credits that we received. And I know we received a certain number of water credits for Cypress Knolls because that was an approved project. So my question is, we still have those water credits, but do we have enough to go beyond 844 units? And if not, with the water situation, what it is in California, and specifically through Marina Coast Water District, would they provide further water credits? And would that then impact us negatively towards the Marina Heights and our core of Marina in terms of what we could do there? So it's multifaceted, but I'm trying to understand the restrictions by water that impact that 844 units.
So you are correct in the water restrictions by lawsuits established at 6,160. But within that, we intend to explore every option that's available. We do have sufficient water right now allocated for the 844. But one question would be, well, if we design these homes smaller differently to where they don't use the original water allocated for that size of unit, if it's a smaller home, uses less water, are we able to add more water units? That's one option. We have a Monterey One recycled water plant that CalAm has finally signed the water purchase agreement. So that is going to go forward. But we have 345 acre feet of recycled water already programmed to come to the city of Marina. And right now you can't use that for direct potable, but the state next year is already saying they will be approving their first direct potable water use. And so in a couple of years, you may have the state saying you can use recycled water directly for potable water. That would free up 345 acre feet. There's just a lot of different options that that we will explore that hopefully can get us above that 444.
Okay, so now there's a further question associated with that. It takes time to explore how we can use that extra water should everything come together as it's being anticipated. There's a time frame for that. There's also a time frame for doing an RFP for a specific plan, and the specific plan would be related to the water credits. So can they run side by side at the same time, or can we update a specific plan to accommodate new water resources? In other words, here's a specific plan, and right now it only has 844 units. However, we've created this plan in such a way because we have a lot of multi-story buildings. We're not using as much of that land. So we have open space land that isn't designated for parks and isn't designated for little shopping areas, restaurant, commercial use that could be set aside as land for future development of housing.
That's a really tough question, because on the one hand, if you say, okay, we're going to say phase in this project and hopefully hope that these different options will move forward, that we can have more water and therefore do these different phases. So then you start to phase a project, but what happens if those other water uses don't come about? Then you phased a project, you start building, and then you have these phases that are going to have water. So I think a critical path in this project is going to have to be water. And while you're concurrently doing all this, you really have to be working on water and potentially additional future water.
I wasn't thinking in terms of a phased project. You do a project that may incorporate the entire area, but the developer's coming in with, I'm going to say, creating neighborhoods with those hubs, as you showed, with the opportunity as water becomes available, if it becomes available, that now that project is completed. That developer's done, he's gone. Now we retained ownership of these pocket areas that could be used for future development should water become available. Am I making myself understood?
Right. I think those are all options that we need to explore as we go forward. Clearly, water is a critical component of this project.
Okay, any more input from planning commission? All right, before we go back to city council for comments and maybe questions, I wanted to just put David Salazar on the spot. David, you've been listening, maybe if you have any input, based on what you've heard tonight, this would be a good time for your input.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Great. Well, thank you again for allowing us to be a part of this study and for us to participate in the way that we did with the charrette. That was a great experience. I think a lot of the questions are excellent questions, and I really don't have anything to add to that. I think the conceptual sort of framework and the plan set forth really kind of sets the groundwork for those type of questions, and the idea that moving forward it will require more specific detailed analysis through the specific plan to answer a lot of these questions in greater detail. And I also want to echo what the city manager had mentioned. When I was on Fort Ord way back when in the 80s, in the whole conversion process, the fight over water was paramount, right? In terms of the reuse of all the Fort Ord, right? Including the university. So I think that's going to be probably the most critical issue in terms of looking at what extent the future development could be and to what degree. So, but those issues can be worked on. And I think he also mentioned some other opportunities in terms of using reclaimed water and all that. So there's ways to sort of look at multiple options, but it's clear that water will be a dictating factor.
Some compliments, and I wanted to say that we also appreciate your contributions to this process. So now we'll go to City Council for any comments or questions. Councilmember Biala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I want to say that the issue of roads is really critical. And I'm sorry if I overstepped in talking about another egress to Cypress Knolls, but I am really concerned about it. And I think that there are issues that we have to look at beyond the actual property of the Cypress Knolls. The Crescent Street just cannot be left like that to absorb 844 to 1,000 units. We have to get that Del Monte extension and the connection there and the extension of Patton Park. We have to. It cannot be left as an oversight. We don't start this project and then say, oh, the extension is going to take another 5 years, but the people are already building there and people are going to be moving in there. So I cannot stress enough that you cannot have that line going down Crescent Street. That street I'm very familiar with. It is impacted constantly because of the high school. We only have that street from Patton Parkway into Rhine-Dollar. So I just think that's a fundamental thing. I don't know how developments usually go. I know at MBEST we have these wonderful streets and lights and everything, and nothing on there. But so that was a little tragic. But you know, it seems like that we build the infrastructure on streets first. And look at how it connects to the larger city and the neighborhoods before we start even thinking about what buildings go in there. So I'm very, I don't know how long the extension is going to be and the Del Monte roundabout, but it has to be said, is this going to take 10 years and meanwhile we're putting up Cypress Knolls? That doesn't make any sense to me. So I hope that we take this extremely seriously, and we need to know when that's coming up and how it coincides with the development of Cypress Knolls. And I don't know if Lane, if you want to comment on that.
No, I think we all understand that the transportation and that's why you have an environmental impact report, and you have to address those issues. You can't have collector traffic all funneling down to a local road.
Right. So, okay, as long as we understand that, that is a priority, then, I don't know what the city can do, but the difference between an 844 cap versus a 2,000, almost 3 times more. I don't know how we can even begin to conceive of this Cypress Knolls development if we don't know, can we build 800 versus 3 times that number on that Cypress Knolls? So it seems to me that we've got to get that resolved first. There is no way we can, have 2,000 units, when we don't even know if we can actually build that. So I don't know what that entails for our city, but I think we've got to get that totally resolved. And that it seems that the climate these days with affordable housing, why would anyone want to restrict us to 800 when we could build 2,000 affordable units? That it's amazing that we would have problems with that, but it's government. So I don't know, but I really think that until that's resolved, I'm just, again, certain things need to be handled first before we even start any other process. And let's see, then, I agree totally with Commissioners Jacobson and Walton. The creativity has to be there. We have to exhaust our options and our understanding of how to create these affordable units. It doesn't happen by chance. It's going to be a concerted effort and sacrifices. We can't build the wonderful things that if you had all the money in the world, you're going to build. If our mission at this point, and you started off saying the number one thing that everybody said is we have to have affordable housing. And if that's our commitment, then we cannot assume that they're going to be like Sea Haven or the Dunes or whatever. We have to do something extraordinary here. We have to test the limits. We have to brainstorm, and we have to get all of the latest, as you all said, the latest technologies. So I just want to put a big dose of reality here. And the last thing is that thank you so much. And I hope you don't see, Pat, folks, I hope you don't see that we ask so many questions and we may sound, like we're complaining or, we're not happy. I am just, you thank us. We owe you a debt of appreciation. You're doing this pro bono for us. I mean, you are such experts in this and you're not charging us. This is like, so amazing to me. So thank you. And, and I also wanted to know, when are you going to leave us? Like, can you stay on, for the next 5 years? But I mean, seriously, does your tenure with us end the minute you do your conceptual plan, and then we are at a point where we start the specific plan RFP? Is that when you end, or is it going to end? You better not be.
This particular portion of the process ends.
Really? Oh my gosh.
We're still around in different capacities, in different ways. Hands in very close friends, Guido, and I'm actually from the private sector. So one never knows where I may come up. I'll just did that. Besides, we invested a lot of work with some of that.
Oh wow. I didn't know it was tonight. But anyway, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you,
Mr. Mayor.
All right, let's go to Councilmember Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I agree with Councilmember Biala that I think the allowed number of units first will need to be resolved. How can you design if you don't know how many? Prevailing rates, just a remark. It is a challenge to make it affordable, but it will also provide a higher income for potential buyers, which is the whole goal of the prevailing rates. So having said that, I agree that it will be good to look into modular homes, and they will still need to be installed. So people will still need to get paid prevailing rates while doing that. For the staff report, just a remark about, it says service members were exposed to asbestos fibers in the buildings where they ate, slept, and worked. I just want to state that asbestos only becomes a health hazard if the material is damaged. So don't think that, we all grew up with asbestos. So tree selection, will be very important, but also the maintenance of the trees. Tree care plan, I've mentioned that before. So irrigation if needed and fertilizer in our sandy area. Public transportation. I didn't see it was mentioned a little bit, but I would have liked to see more of it because I think instead of having it being an afterthought, it should be one of the basics in the design. And bus stops should be designed at logical locations. Also for the Marina High School, kids could use public transportation and learn how to use it and hopefully not be so dependent on cars like their parents are. Okay. One more remark about the future civic center. I agree that 20 years ago, the Lock Padden Park was the best location for the 3 that were then available. But I will repeat, I think we owe it to the city and all its residents to really look at a more central location than on the edge of the city. I'm almost done.
Commissioner, when you say edge, you mean the western edge?
Yes, or any edge. Just.
But Lock Padden would be on the western edge?
That's the western edge. Yeah, but any edge, if we can find a more central location, if you look at towns that grew, but usually the town center will be found right in the middle. So, and I've mentioned before, we might at one point, East Garrison might be annexed. That will even make it further south, or East Campus. Yeah. So I think this is a unique option too. I know that the other location offers enough space, but offering enough space for me, that's not, that's so minimal. It's a minimal. We need more. We need people around the civic center. We need businesses. We need people living there. So that's my dream. I still have to dream of a town square. And people will be working at, of course, at the new civic center. But at night, it will be, except for our city manager who works late, for the rest, it will be dark. And just like the library, if there's no event at night, it's dead. It's dark. So if you can mix it with residents, that will be ideal, in my opinion. But the senior housing, what Nancy Amadeo mentioned, I so agree with everything you said about designing for decades ago. I'm not as old as Nancy, but almost. So decades ago, I was involved, or I learned about a study to look at this, and it doesn't need to be more expensive. Like if you make a door wider, it can be cheaper than making a wall wider, especially if you do concrete or stone. But anyway, I think that's so good, and not just for Cypress Knolls, but for the entire city or the entire country, world. Okay. And then for the economy, it's hard to predict how many businesses this development will be able to attract. And also was mentioned a place for large gatherings, such as a concert or festival. There will be competition from the dunes very close by, with the Dunes Shopping Center and the promenade, and potentially an amphitheater in the future park. So I would love to have bakeries in every development, any neighborhoods, downtown. But we need businesses to wanting to invest. So, and of course we don't know. That's my dream, a square with a bakery and pedestrians and a bus stop. Oh, and space for to park bicycles and scooters. Okay, and then my final remark is, nobody will be surprised. We need to plan and budget long-term maintenance for everything in this development. But thank you all so very much. And I agree. I cannot believe you do this all for pro bono. And so I know we all appreciate you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Let's go to Councilmember McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's okay. I'd like to share 70 seconds of video. I'm logged into Zoom and it shows a 3D printed house, which I don't think many people have probably seen. Certainly I hadn't seen until this week. and it has no sound, so maybe I can make my comments while that's playing. Let's see if we can get this to work here. Here we go. So first, I'm always impressed with the quality of comments from the dais, and I think I certainly second Councilmember Biala and Bishir's comments, and I really love these study sessions for that reason. But my favorite comments of the night were from Doug Yount, who said, "Firm on the guiding principles, but flexible on the implementation." And I like that comment because I don't really understand how much detail we need on those guiding principles. You know, in the staff report, I see things like, "Hey, we're going to do good, cool energy stuff," but I think of things like microgrids and electric only homes, which actually is in the staff report, and maybe finding a little bit more detail on that. And then the other comment I appreciated was from Commissioner St. John, who talked about the Tempe walkable city. And I think that finding these examples are exactly the kind of things that we need to do and bring back to the city council of things that we like. That was it. So you don't have to be distracted by that anymore. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Well, as I think about things like prevailing wage, the trades, lumber prices, I think we need to look at things like 3D printed homes and to see if there is a cost benefit that will bring down the average price of these homes and make them truly affordable. And I don't know that we can do that until we really explore all of these innovative cutting edge ideas and really kind of talk about them. And I'm just a little confused as to where that happens. I heard, Councilmember Biala talk about whether now is really the right time to go into the specific plan. And I'm kind of struggling with that too. I think there's unanswered questions, but I also am hearing that the sooner we enter into that process, we can apply for grants. It kind of helps move that process along as well. So I kind of just want to make that comment as we, kind of move forward tonight. I do think this is really a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity for all of us to develop a project that, for good or bad, is going to have some kind of legacy. And I think, speaking for all of us, this is our one chance to kind of really look at what we want that legacy to look like 10, 20, 30 years from now. I think of things like passive homes, 3D printing, microgrids, community land trust, car-free neighborhoods, and how that fits into Cypress Knolls, or as some people call Lower Patton Park. Even the idea of Cypress Knolls, right? We say that over and over again, but it's something we've just gotten a habit of saying because that was the original specific plan. There's really no reason that we're going to call it that, but we've gotten so used to just going with the status quo, and that kind of concerns me in a lot of ways. So the last thing I'm going to say is that I'm really interested in having this neighborhood have some very innovative policy-based development. So I think of things like giving renters a voice, saying, in a traditional neighborhood, right, only the owner gets a vote on an HOA, but maybe we deed restrict this property to say, no, you know what, if you live here, you're a member of our community, we don't care if you're a renter or not, your voice matters, and you're empowered to develop and shape what this neighborhood is going to look and operate like. So I think we need to look not just at construction innovation, but also policy innovation, community land trust, deed restrictions, things like that. So those are my comments. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. I have a couple questions that came out of the comments regarding the RFP, request for proposals. Will public meetings help to develop that?
I think our intent is to, on the staff end, work on that proposal, and we may want to get some assistance from our group right here in developing that proposal. But then we'll get Hanson, Brian.
Okay. No longer pro bono, I assume.
Right, and they may be interested in responding to the RFP too, so we've got to be careful with that aspect. But the intent is to work on that and then bring it back to council and flush it out and be sure that we're covering everything that we want with it. And so it may take a couple meetings to get it where we want.
All right. My next question kind of aligns with what Commissioner Abedin was saying. If 844 homes is not our cap in the long run, this is a similar idea to what she said. Could we not build into the original RFP 2 times the open space we really need or think we want, with the option of building into half of that open space with infill should state law or whatever needs to change allow us to build more than 844. Very similar to what she said.
So I don't think the RFP is not going to get into specifics like that. The RFP is to help us get the firm that we want. Once we have the firm on board, those are the specifics and the details as we.
So that's a specific plan, I should have said. So might the specific plan do what Nancy suggested or what I'm suggesting, which is very similar?
Correct. Yes. And same thing that Brian, a lot of people have brought up. Those are things that would be discussed as we go through a whole specific plan creation process.
Okay. Might the RFP be in 2 phases, where the first phase, we could put out an RFP for a firm to research our ideas and our questions so that we could, as Councilman McCarthy was suggesting, we could get a little smarter before the specific plan by having an RFP team, selected team through an RFP, answer questions about how does modular construction, how might that work best here at Cypress Knolls, and how can high performance standards be included in the specific plan so that we know that they increase the affordability of living in the home, they increase the health of the people who live in the home. Maybe they're not any more costly if they're done right by people who know what they're doing. But if we don't know that going in, we're not going to be strong advocates to include them. And so putting out an RFP in 1 phase to do a specific plan, before we know a lot of these know better about these topics we're discussing. So could we do 2 RFPs? The one would be sort of a research RFP to look at microgrids and maximum connectivity and policy-based development like Brian was talking about. Could we do 2 RFPs? Phase 1 research, phase 2 specific plan.
Well, the research that you're talking about really is part of that whole specific plan process. So I think in the RFP, all that we're trying to do is say these are the skill sets that we're wanting in a team, and so and they may have other subcontractors as part of the team. We'll be wanting to look at experts in these different creative type of building products and systems. We will want experts in fiscal and economic analysis. And so I think those are all things, and if Brian or Hanson may have some thoughts on that.
I'm leading a team right now doing a project called Lithium Valley, which seems like innovation. And it's basically to master plan 500,000 acres, which we don't have all the answers on a new process to extract lithium from geothermal to really, and then ultimately develop batteries, lithium batteries, and create a new renewable energy center for not just California, but the Western United States. But the RFP started out with, look, we want a piece that's research and development. So the very first phase is, how do I really get to the number of units I want, and how do I integrate the technology? So you can have one RFP, but your very first phase of it is doing just what your city manager is saying, is really almost a research and development phase to get to that phase of establishing, here's the things. You got to understand the water. What are my good negotiating things? You've got a lot of tools that you can work with. And the next one is, what about using technology? Now, this gentleman writes a lot of RFPs for government, so let's bring him up.
I've done enough, but not an expert. Now, what the city manager is mentioning of integrating what I would call the technical background studies into the specific plan process is really a logical sequence, because you do want to integrate the thinking behind the specific plan and the technical studies. What I've done in RFPs, I was thinking, okay, where's a similar example? When a city does a specific plan, there's a lot of background studies or technical studies that a city might define, whether it be we want to explore the latest and new technologies, more studies on endangered species, the transportation issue, whatever it might be. So you could have a RFP structure that, okay, we want first phase, we want background studies that address these particular issues, and you would define them in the RFP. And then that information that's used by the consultants and is integrated into the policy formation for the actual specific plan. So you can certainly structure your RFP to address what you're saying. I do agree with the city manager, more you kind of integrate the process rather than do two separate RFPs and two separate, you're talking about consultant team anyway, when you're putting together not just a planning expert, you're bringing the transportation, the engineering folks, maybe a sustainability person. You define the expertise you need to be part of the specific plan team. So anyway, just wanted to offer that. Sure. Oh.
Presentation tonight, Mongoose was mentioned as a financing tool. And Mongoose is very expensive for the person who moves into the property. And if you're trying to do something affordable for purchase or for rent, I'm not sure that Melrose is the right avenue to take because it drives up the cost. So what I would want to see council consider is that in the RFP, they look at other financing tools that do not have a negative impact on the end cost for the eventual buyer.
Yeah, our intent is we are not going to limit it to yes, you have to do a Melrose. No, you don't have to do a Melrose. We're looking at the financial and fiscal sustainability of the project. And so we'll be looking at all options out there. You may look at the node A, which is really close to Imgen and in Highway 1. That's prime commercial development property. You may say, okay, let's develop portions of this to generate a tax base that can support it. So we'll just be looking at broad fiscal sustainability, but we definitely do not want to limit it to any one thing because it'll be challenging.
Okay, council has a new policy where if a council person like myself takes approximately 5 minutes or more to stop and then go around and let everybody else have another bite at the apple. So does anyone on the planning commission have any comments or questions? Let's go to you next.
I have one, and I think maybe this is just as I'm going through and I'm listening to all this, and my concern is I'm seeing an escalating dollar value. And that's, we talk about cost controls, and at the same time, we talk about innovation. And I build data centers as part of my career right now. And every integration, every new generation that we build and come with new technology, right now we're moving from water cooled to waterless. It is not an incremental increase in cost. And my concern is if we go out to an RFP here is that in addition to that we also have a transparency on the selection criteria that when we're looking at these options of different technologies and innovations that we're going to use, that we're also providing the public with a decision criteria that we are providing on how we're going to select these, because there is a cost for every one of these things. When we move away from stick built and we go to modular and we go to an area where there aren't a lot of modular companies in California, you start getting into the cost of transportation. And so you get into the cost of the foundations. It doesn't make it not useful. It just means that the square footage cost can seem like it sounds really good. It could save 10 to 15% on average. But by the time you add in transportation, everything else, it may not. So I think just having those criteria that the public can look at to help set the benchmark when we come back to one of the future meetings on the planning commission or the city council, that the public understands these are kind of the criteria and baselines that we're looking on. So it's not as subjective a process. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. Okay. Anyone on council? Let's go to Councilmember McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Just really appreciate the comments about cost. In the tech world, we call some of these technologies unicorn technologies because the promise is, right, that they're cheaper and they're better. And that's not always the case. But what I would say is that we do everything we can as we explore these technologies to ensure that we try to get the cost down. And so let's say maybe it's 3D printing. Maybe we offer space at the airport for a manufacturer to put their 3D printing equipment, pro bono, whatever the case might be. And that might be one way to lower the cost. So yes, I think that we need to make sure that all these technologies are, at the end of the day, making the homes more cost effective to the potential buyer. But I also think there's some innovative ways that we can address that. I think my closing comments just are, I know we're not really taking action, but if I wanted to discuss general direction, I would say I would hope that the PC and the city council continue to be in close alignment. I've really enjoyed tonight, and I think that's really important moving forward, because what I don't want to happen is that the planning commission has all these great ideas that the council is not maybe on board with such a huge project. And then we're just kind of at odds with each other. So I think tonight has been really good for me. The second piece is, and someone mentioned it, but as part of a process moving forward, I hope we can take the top 20 technologies and really as a council and a planning commission start to understand them. Because right now I don't really understand microgrids. I don't really understand even 3D printing, even though I showed a really cool video. But I need to, right, in order to make a decision. So I hope that that's part of this process within the next year, is that we really start diving into some of these technologies. And then finally, just that, we continue to remain as flexible as possible. I know that's a double-edged sword, but I think it's going to be important moving forward. So thank you, Mayor.
All right. And tonight is somewhat of an action item because our agenda asks us to consider the preparation of an RFP by a consultant and to provide direction to staff. So before we go home tonight, we will be attempting those two things. Councilmember Amadeo and others, I think, Grace Silva Santella mentioned about senior housing, and the original specific plan, as we heard Brian tonight, was entirely senior housing. And the way that worked out was that the city council and the city took the planning commission and a few members of the public on a tour. And we went to the Sacramento area and we saw a 50-acre assisted living senior complex out of Rockland that we loved. And then we went to Morgan Hill and we toured a 20-acre assisted senior, well, it wasn't assisted, it was just a senior community, and we loved it. And we thought that both the 50-acre and the 20-acre would be perfect on Cypress Knolls. But we really didn't understand that Cypress Knolls had 188 acres. When we saw those other two smaller, we thought those were perfect for Marina. But we could have fit several of those in Cypress Knolls. And before we went on the tour, we were thinking of using all of Cypress Knolls' 188 acres for those kinds of facilities. And when we got back from the tour, we never really adjusted the fact that we had a lot more land than what we loved. And so it's almost a good thing that it didn't happen, because it was going to be 188 acres of senior assisted living with a continuum of care center, secured, where you could be locked in basically, because you needed to be contained in a floor. But anyway, so now that we all know that we have so much land, it is entirely feasible to set aside some acres, maybe 20, or whatever acres we want, to be an assisted living inclusive development, or just what Nancy was saying, where it's all developed. It's developed to age in place. But that's where we came from on the senior housing. And it was the 1997 Forward Base Reuse Plan, basically a CEQA document, California Environmental Quality Act, that determined to meet the needs of endangered species and water challenges, that there'd be this dictate of 6,000 plus homes. And it's not clear to me, and this is another thing that we probably need to figure out, is how changeable is that dictate now that Fort Ord Reuse Authority is gone, and which lawsuits or which settlements, which dictates remain maybe in perpetuity. And And what kind of legislation might there be to be able to change, what would be needed to change those dictates in respect to current day's demand for more affordable housing, et cetera, that we've all talked about today. The latest technology, Brian kind of delved into it, to me includes this higher performance standard of construction. And it's my understanding that when people know what they're doing, it can be neutral fiscally, financially neutral, or it can be maybe 5% more expensive to build a higher performance standard unit, whether it be an apartment or commercial bakery or any building whatsoever. And so that's one of those topics that would be nice to look into, along with the list that we've heard from others tonight. And my question is to Brian and Hanson, do you believe that qualified higher performance builders who have the experience can build a house about the same price or a little bit more than your standard building?
I talked to some of the experts. They can, and I can tell you, I've worked with a number of architects that ultimately feel they have. That ultimately you can have very high performance, lead, and you really can meet certain things. Now, has that translated to an affordable price? I can't say that. I can't really testify to that. But I can say from cost standpoint that high performance buildings can be done within a reasonable cost of typical costs. So.
All right. And I'd like to ask Guido. Sorry, Hanson. Sorry.
No.
Please respond.
That is interesting because it just came up in the community. A related question came up in the community about high performance buildings. And what we heard from some developers is, yes, we can deliver, but they're probably for financial feasibility input. I think it was mentioned by Councilman Baela too. There has to be a little bit of a give. You might need to compromise a bit on the design standards. For instance, if the form-based code requirements are very costly and you want performance buildings, there might be a balance that the council will need and planning commission to consider which takes priority, the high performance standards or perhaps the form-based code. There might be or other requirements, so sometimes there's this balancing of priorities. And I'm speaking from the developers who just spoke at a meeting on this very similar topic the other night. Yeah. So we can't deliver everything you want, especially if you want, middle or, more affordable housing or workforce housing. I'm just kind of relaying the response I hear from developers.
Okay, so what I've heard is that developers who haven't done it, don't know how to do it, it's more expensive if they try, and it's not their bailiwick, so they're not that excited about it. But those who have done it for a while have a different perspective, a different answer. So I was just kind of getting.
Yeah, there's different. So there's definitely a niche for. Some developers are very cutting edge, and I've seen some pretty innovative technologies being applied, and then you have, I'll call them the cookie cutter developers that are more traditional. So
right.
That's a good point you raised.
Right, and the reason it's increasing in importance to me is because there's a life cycle cost of everything. You do solar panels and you might pay money up front, but then in the end, after 25 years, you've actually saved money and you've helped in other ways. And these higher performance standards, I understand, make the living in the home cheaper, because the water bills and the electricity bills are lower, and the better health conditions, there's less health impacts on the individuals living there. So when we're talking about affordable homes for lower income families, or even other families too, but especially lower income who can't afford higher utilities and can't afford the higher health bills, if building higher performance standards helps them in the long run at a very little to no cost, then we should strongly be considering it and be understanding it. So my last, not to beat it to death, but if you did modular homes, can you do higher performance standards on a modular design? Allison's nodding, yeah. Hanson and Brian, do you have?
I don't have any answer for that because I'm not.
Okay. So those are the kinds of questions we'd want to look at. Modular might be better for price, but then there's transportation, but then you might do it locally with manufacturing. But then can you put higher performance standards involved? Those are all pros and cons we'd want to look at, right?
Yeah.
All right, so Jay chimed in and answers, yes. I like on page 10, there's a bicycle pedestrian north-south trail shown going from basically the Shell gas station at Del Monte Rain Dollar over to Second Avenue. It looks a lot like our original Second Avenue extension alignment, which we're finding, might not happen as this line shows. This line shows a pedestrian bike trail. That used to be the auto option, but because of the Sanguilia rare plant, we're thinking the only option might be to hug, like Tommy Balea said in public comment, hug the alignment just to the east of Highway 1, which would require Caltrans to do something they don't normally do. And so we have our planning department, Guido, telling us, we'll look into Caltrans hugging, using their right of way, but, good luck. It's not very likely. And then we have the university professor, Fred Watson, saying, if you want a road with cars on it going along this alignment to connect Shell gas station to Target, good luck. It's a dead end. So we have two options being told us by different people that are dead ends. What we're looking into, well, I guess I should ask staff, are we still looking into both options, or are we looking into the option that's no longer shown on this map for an auto route?
The last direction from the council was to explore working with Caltrans about realigning the Del Monte connection. Long term, the Del Monte connection, it's critical to our vitalization of our downtown. It provides the ability to have north and south exit onto Highway 1. And so when we're looking at our core downtown and our old downtown vitalization, if they can get cars that are coming south to be able to go off on reservation instead of going on the engine and in those areas, that becomes critical. So at this point, the direction of the council is work with Caltrans and see if that option's on the table, and then we'll come back to council.
Okay. We're getting too far afield, but how can we go on planning Cypress Knolls if there's an elephant in the room and it's going to have a big impact on Cypress Knolls? Let's go to Councilmember Amadeo. Let's go to Commissioner Amadeo. I said it so many times.
I had one other question, a piece of analysis that I think should be done. And that is, we're talking about workforce housing. And we're talking about primarily to buy. But in things that I've read about people today who are very mobile, they're not necessarily looking for something to buy. They're looking for something to rent. So before we tie ourselves into a buyer's market, we should be looking at what's the percentage of that target audience that we're looking at, what age bracket is that, and what income bracket is it that, and then within that, who are the buyers? What's the percentage that are actually buyers, so that we have a good idea of how much do we want to build for a buyer and how much do we want to build for a renter? The other thing that we should look at, because if it's primarily renters, they may be very interested in having their utility bills low because they've got solar on the roof. But it may also be that having a solar field located somewhere on the property that provides electric resource that reduces everybody's carbon footprint and will work just as well for a buyer as it will for a renter. And then you have that added in at some point, those what do they call those cells have to be replaced. I don't know if it's at 15 years or 30 years, because I know technology improves over time, but then it's paid for within monies within the community that have been set aside. Just like we set aside money to replace vehicles, money is set aside, whereas the renter isn't going to set the money aside, but it will come out of their rent. It will go
towards it because the buyer that is now renting the property is putting money aside within that community. It's being collected. It's like a 218, I believe, is the kind of program that it would be in order to ensure that that kind of maintenance and that kind of replacement happens in a timely manner before it has the opportunity to fail. And that way we're actually designing for the people who are going to live there, the people who are they mostly buyers or are they mostly renters? I think that's something that the council needs to know before going forward. And that doesn't mean you can't move forward with an RFP to get that first line in that will develop the RFP for the specific plan. But that's information that I think is important that we have in order to do the specific plan down the road.
I completely agree. Those are all components that will be through this multi-year process. We will look at rental versus for sale, what the need is, what the cost of it is. We'll be looking at the whole energy, the microgrids, our 3 CCC energy that we're now members of. And that whole group was initially put together. The thought was we're going to build these massive solar farms in the area. But as they got into it, it was like, well, it's going to cost 5 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. And you can buy the solar farms down south where it's a penny and a half cents a kilowatt hour. And that discussion quickly went away. But those are all the issues as we go through this process. It's going to be a very detailed process, a lot of issues. And I think what we've heard, we have a great framework that our consultants have put together, but we got to be flexible as we go through the process because we're going to uncover a lot of new, different information, and we're going to be pivoting quite a bit as we go through.
Okay, any other comments or questions from Planning Commission? I think we're going to wrap up in about 10 minutes. Okay, council members? Okay, I just had 3 very quick things to say. There was a mention that if we save 90% of the Gilly, we're doing great. And I think it would be a great thing. It may not be enough, right? Because if 90% leaves us damaging 10 acres, then we might have to find 30 to 40 or more acres somewhere else. We might not have those. Guido, do you want to talk at all about whether 90% would be enough? Or if 90% may be enough or may not be enough for us to go forward?
As part of the specific plan, we will, look at on-site or off-site mitigation. That's not maybe the focus for today, but obviously we know it's a priority for the city and the council, and habitat and species mitigation will definitely be part of the EIR. So,
all right, maybe that's the last time you'll adjust that mic. So it's kind of like the redwood forest right now. If there was a proposal to save 90% of the redwood forest and develop 10%, it would be a non-starter because even though it sounds good, we've already lost so much of what there is. We're left with 3%. So you don't want to take 10% more of the 3% that are living, so something like that. And then on page 27, I thought there was a really good picture of park space near 3rd Avenue. That's also at the gateway, if you would, to the Veterans Transition Center. And the Veterans Transition Center right now, talk about affordable housing and people in need. They're right there in need of affordable housing and quality living, but they have no parks. They don't have any place to go as far as green space. So it's a really nice, it's right there. So it would serve, Cypress Knolls, it would serve the dunes, it would serve VTC. That's a very nicely situated optional place that's shown there. And then we also have to think about, the VTC is basically 100% adults, right? And so if you have families going to the park, right. So those 7 kids would need it as well. And then all the kids and all the families that go there, they would have to be safe. And if the VTC is serving people coming out of very challenging, the most kinds of challenging life situations, there'd have to be that community protection so that everybody could be safe. And that it's just more complicated when you're trying to serve these very challenged populations. And that's what VTC is doing a great job. But it's going to be a little bit more intensive management, I would think, if we have a dense population of people trying to get their lives together, and then you have families that are going there at the same time. And I mean, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but it's a concern that comes up in my mind. And I think we just need to keep that in mind. And if it's really a concern, that we address it. If it's not a concern, then we learn why it's not a concern. My very last thing is about the indigenous peoples, Native Americans that would have been here. They probably would have used mostly our water bodies that are what's now a Lock Patton Lake. And it was connected to a system of vernal pools that's been dissected by roads and freeways. And so that's probably where they mostly would have been in Marina, is hanging around, just like we spend more time around water bodies. They would have too. Freshwater bodies in Marina would have been quite rare. So they would have been focused on spending time near the freshwater bodies that we might have had then. Whereas up in Cypress Knolls, kind of a sandy hill, I'm not sure that there would be nearly as much use there. So maybe for the Cypress Knolls plan is not quite the place to think we could get a big bang for our buck on Native American remembrances and respect. But at the Lock Patton management plan, there's a lot of opportunity to find out from local descendants how that land might have been used, and interpret that in the signage, and include them, Native Americans that are here to guide us and teach us how we can develop over there, because we are going to be developing a new master plan there. And that's really relevant to Native Americans, seems to me. Yeah, all the plants that we want to cut down so we have more open water, those are the toolies that they use to build their homes and their canoes, their transportation. So I think we do need to get that connection going over at Lock Patton. No more comments or questions on the project, but I wanted to thank Allison and Guido and the team that they've brought here. And I want to thank the Planning Commission. I think this has been one of the better, Nancy, maybe you could comment too. This has been one of the better integrations of Planning Commission and City Council that I've experienced. And I think it's because we have such a really great Planning Commission. You're all here, and you're all very skilled, and we really appreciate your engagement with us tonight. And thank you, Doug. Doug usually does the audio video. He manages the slideshows, but tonight he's probably because Audrey is over there. So Audra's over there, so he can't sit where Audrey is. And thank you. This is our acting chief of police, Steve Russo. If some of you don't know, that's our chief of police. Thank you for being here, Steve. And thanks to everyone in the public who's been here for several hours, everybody online. It's been a great night. Any final comments from anybody? All right, well then let's go to our our coup de grace, specific direction to staff. What I would suggest is something like redirect staff to proceed with a 2-phase RFP. The first phase being to research the technologies and policies, the kinds of things we've talked about tonight, where we want more information. And then the second phase would be the specific plan that we came into tonight expecting an RFP would cover. But that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of direction I think we should go. Well, let's hear from Planning Commission first. What kind of direction would you like to provide to staff? I had another question for you, Guido.
I don't think he wants your question. You mentioned one RFP that would accomplish 2 tasks, and I really think it's going out for an RFP in order to do all of the analysis to determine what should go into a specific plan. Then you do an RFP for the specific plan and send out your request for proposals.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways of doing it. I thought I heard. Why don't we hear from the experts?
Yeah, I would love to hear from the experts as well, because that would be my understanding.
Well, and I think what they told us is we think the best process is just go out to one RFP, because we're going to be working with one company to develop all these details. They're going to be the experts once we get through this process and figure out all these intricate components. then we develop the specific plan. And that's the team that you've spent 2 years with doing all this analysis that you want to move forward with that specific plan.
Can you use the mic? Can you use the mic a little stronger, Nancy?
I just want to make sure I understand. It's one RFP, and whoever wins that award of the RFP is going to have two goals. One is to do all the background analysis that has been asked for tonight, and the other is to create the specific plan. Okay,
Correct.
Thank you. Go ahead, Guido, it's all yours.
I would hope that if we go this way tonight, that we have a council meeting, maybe the planning commission too, if they wish to join us, so that we can draft a list of components that we want to be investigated. Because we have great notes taken by staff tonight, but I think council would probably want another bite at the apple to make sure that new things we think of, or people like Jay might come back to us after tonight and say, hey, don't forget this. And so does that make sense that we would shoot for basically a 2-phase RFP, but before we did that, we would have another meeting like tonight where we instructed staff what we wanted, and staff would tell us what they wanted. And at the end of that night, we'd have a pretty clear list of what would be researched, because you could research the world and that would take a decade. Lane's already bumped it up to 2 years. I'd hoped it would take a year just for that phase 1, but maybe we should be realistic. And what do the experts think it will take? Will it take 2 years for that first phase of research and answering these questions? No, not the specific plan, just the first phase, gathering the information that Brian, everyone has referenced tonight.
We usually plan out versions like this. I just talked about it, complicated. And I think bringing a lot of different experts in the area. Thank you very much. As I said, we usually anticipate this. That first phase is usually going to be anywhere from 6 months to 9 months. And then your specific plan process. The question is always the EIR. And then the EIR is what lingers on from the standpoint of that. So whether you can do the whole thing in 2 years, or it ultimately gets out to 2.5 years, that's what you have to take. Well, once you get your list of issues, then a consultant can respond to it. Who's the team members he wants to bring in? Are there specific expertise, whether it's from energy or whether it's from water and the negotiation? So that's my answer.
So when you said 2 years, does that include the EIR, or is it before the EIR?
You asked for a lot of things to be done up front, so it may mean that it is going to push it out to 2.5 years or something of that nature. I'm hoping, I would hope, so this is just me, that there's ways you can use the existing EIR that was done for your original plans and somehow tie into the EIR you're doing for the general plan. That can save you an awful lot of time if you can establish a threshold, a number of units for this property. You create a designation, and then you can tier off. Tiering is a approach that you really wouldn't want to try to do under CEQA allowed.
Tier off the existing EIR.
The general plan EIR.
The general plan EIR.
The general plan EIR is going to set a threshold. Your biggest issues for this property from a CEQA standpoint are going to be your traffic, going to be your greenhouse gas, and it's going to be how you're preserving those natural resources that are considered endangered in the state of California.
And probably water. Okay. So all in, you're thinking best guess 2.5 years?
Best guess, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Biala?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just looking at the staff report. It looks like we're supposed to also give direction to staff regarding the inclusion of the cypress knolls in the general plan update. Is that something that we need to say?
Yes, that would be our desire. Just give direction for that.
Okay. Can we make a friendly amendment then to yours?
Sure. I'll just start the motion and we can all build it, that we direct staff to embark on a
You don't need a motion tonight, Mayor.
How do we provide direction?
You just provide direction to staff, and I think staff understands that you're issuing an RFP and that you want to include the specific plan within the general plan.
I'll second her motion.
And it works really well that way because there's a lot of comments and feedback that often when you do a specific motion, things are left out. So that this gives us the flexibility. We get direction from the council and then we can really put together what we need to.
Okay, so considering the inclusion of Cypress Hills in the general plan update and considering specific direction or direction, why don't Lane, you tell us what you encapsulate to be our next steps, and then we'll just say if that sounds good.
So what I've heard is we're going to include this whole Cypress Knolls specific plan in our general plan process, and so they'll move forward and look at those land use designations, transportation, all those impacts, and then we will come back to council. We'll develop an RFP and come back to council either in a council meeting or another study meeting. If you want another study meeting like this, we can do that. And that RFP will be looking at really a two-phase process. First, going through all the information gathering that we need to do that will give us the information that we need. And then the second part of that will actually move forward with a specific plan.
Okay, so I see two steps. One, staff continues down the general plan update path, and they include Cypress Knolls along that route. And then while they're doing that, when it's convenient for staff, that staff comes back to council to jointly outline an RFP.
Yes,
that's it. Those are the two things. Okay,
Mr. Mayor.
Let's go to Councilmember McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. What I'm not hearing though in that is this piece about really coming back and looking at these innovative cutting edge technologies and really getting the bodies to understand what those are, because I'm worried that we're going to try to approve or discuss something that we don't really fully understand. And so I would like that to be part of the direction. And then I would also ask if maybe staff can provide some input onto some of these cutting edge technologies that maybe they're aware of that we're not. So that it's not just council that's adding to this list, right?
Right. So step two that I heard was that we have a meeting and staff and council and planning commission, should they wish to be part of this, we draft that outline, which includes all these things that are going to go into the first phase of RFP.
Okay.
To the mayor, we understand. I completely understand what the council's asking. You want to see the best available technology to build, zero energy, low water usage. I totally understand what you guys are trying to say. So I would just say we will prepare the RFP with best available technology for housing development, and we will come back with the RFP traditional master plan. So I'm very clear about what's being asked of staff.
The only difference from what I thought, from what you just said, is that we'd have a council meeting to make sure that we had the right outline or table.
Absolutely. We will bring that RFP back to the council and we will show the best available technologies.
I think you're getting ahead of what we wanted. I think we wanted you to come back and have almost like a study session where staff and council and maybe planning commission, we jointly decide which technologies, which rabbit holes we're going to jump in.
I guess I understood that a little bit different. We're going to come back with the draft RFP to council that we got a lot of input here tonight and all those components that we'll put in that draft RFP, and then we'll sit down with the council and go through that and then make tweaks, changes, additions.
Okay, so we're going to try to incorporate what we've talked about tonight.
Yes, we will the best available technology to build the master plan community that is net zero, green, and all the other great opportunities out there to build a world-class project. That's the first part of the RFP. The second part is just a traditional RFP for getting a consultant firm looking at all the stuff we talked about today.
Okay, so the first, the next time you come with a draft RFP, that draft will have attempted to incorporate all these specifics, and we will be able to say, oh, you missed one.
Exactly.
Okay,
That's what we're going to bring back.
exactly. Let's go to Councilmember Biala.
Thank you. And Guido, the whole point to the research on newer technologies is because we're trying to make this thing affordable. So if you could put that goal in, because otherwise, yes, it would be nice to have high tech, everything, right? But that's not the driver. We're doing it because we're trying to figure out how to best make it affordable. So if you could put that affordable.
I know what you're saying.
Okay, and then the other thing is what our consultants talked about the tiering of the EIR.
I started my career in SQL. I'm totally to do that. As long as we have a number of generally how many units, we can go to our SQL consultant. They put it in the sausage maker. They pump out a traffic report that generally comports with what Cypress Knolls is going to be, what all the other cumulative projects are going on in the city, and that gets put in the general plan EIR. And when Cypress Knolls either comes online then that Cypress Knolls EIR is tiered off of the general plan EIR. So I think we're going to do that.
And we don't need to include that.
Much.
Okay, great. Okay.
Heidi saying
yes, normal
general direction.
Yeah, we don't need to give that direction because you totally get it. Okay, great. And you have the expertise.
But I'm just trying to help everybody just trying to.
Thank you.
All right. And thanks to Chairperson Amadeo for leading the Planning Commission. And thanks to Heidi Quinn, although she's a little bit under the weather, she stayed with us the whole time. Kept laying legal. That was good. That's part of her main job. Just kidding, Heidi. She doesn't smile much when she's not feeling well. All right. So we'll adjourn and thank you very much, everybody.